For over 10 years, the routine was the same. A working adult, she would come home, remove her makeup, eat a simple meal, and go to sleep, only to wake up and begin the same day all over again. But this time, upon waking, something was profoundly wrong. At least, that was how it was supposed to be. A jolt of shock ran through her as she stared at her own hands, her own hair. She questioned why it was a shocking, bright pink. Her mind reeled with confusion, wondering what was happening and how she could possibly go to work with such a hair color. But her panic was swiftly eclipsed by a new realization. The room around her was completely unfamiliar. She looked up at an unfamiliar ceiling, then at a ridiculously huge bed. Everything in sight looked impossibly expensive. She knew this was no time to be dazzled by the opulence. Attempting to assess the situation, she tried to move, only to tumble from the edge of the enormous bed with a startled cry. She scrambled towards a vanity, needing to see her own reflection. She squeezed her cheeks, trying to determine if this was really her. The truth crashed down upon her with crushing weight. She had turned into a little girl. Her mind grasped for an explanation, recalling tropes from online novels. She thought of the common scenarios, like being hit by a truck, and wondered if that impossible fantasy they call reincarnation had become her reality. She immediately dismissed the thought. She hadn't been hit by a truck, nor had she suffered from any serious illness. The implication was horrifying. If she had reincarnated, it meant that as a woman in her 30s, she had simply died suddenly at home. The thought that she hadn't even repaid her parents sent her spiraling, wishing it was all just a terrible dream. Her despair was cut short by a knock at the door. A maid entered, announcing that breakfast for Lady Magnolia was ready. As the new name hung in the air, she panicked internally, wondering how she could possibly communicate in a place that was so clearly not Japan. She covers her mouth, a sudden wave of relief washing over her as she realizes she can understand their language. When the maid, Rosa, asks what's wrong, she quickly dismisses the concern with a stammered apology. Standing alone in the grand room, she feels small as Rosa watches from the doorway, puzzled by her behavior. Moments later, another maid arrives carrying a breakfast tray. The young woman notices the girl's vacant stare and asks if she should take the food back. Internally, Magnolia panics, questioning how she could possibly know this person's name. Snapping out of her thoughts, she quickly insists that she will eat. The maid prepares the table, setting out an impressive spread. Magnolia is momentarily stunned by the lavish meal. Her mind races with questions about her reincarnation and this new life, but the incredible sight of the food pushes those anxieties aside for the time being. She decides to simply enjoy the moment, clasping her hands together in gratitude for the meal before her. After she has eaten, the maid notes the lovely weather and suggests a walk. Outside, the vast and beautifully manicured estate awaits. In the sunlit garden, she is met with a cheerful greeting from another beautiful maid. The woman's bright smile and warm welcome to Lady Magnolia leave the young girl momentarily speechless, marveling at her appearance. Her attempt to reply, however, comes out as a childish lisp. She inwardly groans, frustrated by the limitations of her new, small body. The maids, however, simply find it endearing, whispering to each other about how cute their young lady is. The day unfolds in a pleasant haze as she wanders through the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the quiet attendance of the maids. Her new life settles into a routine of simple luxury, being pampered by her attendants, enjoying delicious meals, sleeping soundly, and admiring the vibrant estate gardens. This pampered existence feels like a perfect dream. Surrounded by her attendants, she reflects that this is the ideal life of a noble lady. As she sips her tea, she thinks she wouldn't mind if she never woke up, letting out a contented yawn. 5 days pass just like that. Lying in her extravagant bed, she silently retracts her previous thoughts. The adult woman within her is profoundly bored. The luxurious bed is just fabric, and she worries her mind is stagnating. If this is all a dream, she now desperately wishes to wake up. She begins to question her entire existence, wondering if she is a prisoner. Her daily routine is a monotonous cycle of sleeping and eating, with no entertainment to speak of. The room, though opulent, contains only furniture for adults, bookshelves and desks, but not a single picture book. It is a space with nothing prepared for a child. Her frustration boiling over, she throws her small body against the grand double doors of her room. She pushes with all her might, grunting and trembling from the strain, but the heavy wood refuses to budge. It is a ridiculously heavy door, clearly not designed for a child to open. Collapsed on the floor from the effort, a chilling realization dawns on her. Now that she thinks about it, perhaps she is being intentionally kept from going outside. The suspicion solidifies as she recalls a recent incident. When she had tried to explore a different walking route, her maid, Rosa, had gently but firmly stopped her, stating that it was still too soon for her. This isn't just care, this feels like confinement. Her gaze sweeps across the silent, sunlit room. The elegant furniture and fine decor do little to dispel the growing feeling of being trapped within a gilded cage. A shadow falls across her face as the pieces click into place, her eyes widening with a dawning horror. Standing alone in the vast chamber, she gives voice to her deepest fear, wondering aloud if she is under house arrest. The unspoken question hangs heavy in the air, her mind swirling with the terrifying implications. Later, as two maids attend to her, dressing her with practiced care, she can only think one thing. No way. It couldn't be true. Deciding to test her theory, she looks towards Rosa and asks where her daddy and mommy are. With a childlike innocence she does not feel, she declares that she wants to eat with them. She is informed that her parents are unavailable. Lord Gerald is occupied with his official duties, while Lady Wisteria is attending a tea party. As she walks down a long, opulent hallway, she mulls over this information. She can understand official duties, but she questions the necessity of so many tea parties. The thought crystallizes into a stark realization. She hasn't seen her parents even once since her reincarnation. She wonders if this emotional distance is simply how noble families operate. The thought triggers a memory of her previous life, and she begins to worry about the family she left behind. Her contemplation is abruptly shattered by a loud clang from outside. Startled by the sound, she cautiously peeks around a corner into a sunlit courtyard. Her eyes land on an unbelievably handsome young boy standing there, a confident smile on his face. He is arguing with his tutor, a man he calls Mr. Bryan, declaring that he intends to become a knight and therefore has no need for book learning. Utterly captivated, she ignores a maid's warning and dashes towards him. As she runs, she recalls the tutor's full name, Brian Chris Gilmore, and a desperate hope dawns on her. This boy is the first person she has met outside of her monotonous routine. Perhaps he knows something about her. She reaches him and grabs onto the hilt of his wooden sword, calling out his name. Her sudden action startles him. He instinctively yanks his sword away, the force of the movement sending her tumbling backward onto the ground. He stares down, his face obscured by shadow and shock. As she looks up from the dirt, her expression one of pure, wide-eyed confusion. In the next moment, two maids rush to the scene. One apologizes to the young master, while the other helps the girl to her feet, admonishing the boy for treating his own little sister in such a way and remarking on how pitiful she looks. The boy averts his gaze, sweating nervously. The maid's words, his own little sister, echo in her mind, and the truth crashes down upon her. This boy is her brother. She could only stare up in disbelief. Her newly discovered brother looked down at her, his face flushed and his eyes swirling with utter confusion as he wondered what on earth was happening. In the background, their mother, Lady Wisteria, observed the scene dispassionately from behind her fan. The realization solidified in the young girl's mind. This family was truly bizarre. The grand estate stood silent under the dark, ominous sky, its imposing structure a stark reflection of the cold family dynamics within. The question echoed in her mind, a silent cry against the backdrop of the mansion. What in the world was going on here? The young noblewoman, Magnolia, grapples with her reality. She was once an ordinary working adult, but after falling asleep in her room, she awoke in the body of a small child with bright pink hair. Now living as a nobleman's daughter, she feels ostracized by her own family. To survive, she resolves that she must first gather information. A maid interrupts her thoughts, calling out to her. In response, she unleashes a barrage of questions on the nearest maid. Her inquiries are rapid and systematic, covering the entire social structure. The working age for commoners, the types of jobs women hold, local customs and traditions, government functions, and even the specifics of getting a job, like interviews and resumes. She continues, asking about household tools, healthcare availability, and even common fashion choices like wearing pants or having short hair. A cheerful maid with freckles begins to answer, starting with the topic of education. She explains that most nobles enter the Royal Academy in the capital at the age of 13. Their schooling is divided into 3 years in the lower division and another 3 in the upper division, with graduation at 18. She then contrasts this with the lives of commoners. For them, it depends on the family, but they usually start working as apprentices around 10 years old. After about 5 years of training, they take on full responsibilities as craftsmen, at which point they are considered adults and may get married. The scene shifts to another maid being questioned. She introduces herself as Lila Bernard, a maid of the Gilmore Marquis family. When asked if this is her first interview and if she is nervous, she quietly confirms that she is, just a little. Magnolia observes this exchange, a determined look on her face. She internally reflects that perhaps she went too far with her joke, but reaffirms her commitment. If this is what her lady wishes, she will do her best to fulfill her duty. Lila continues her explanation, outlining the typical life paths for noble women. The main options are to get married after graduating from the academy or to become an apprentice before getting married. Some might skip the academy for home education or even join a convent, but all paths seem to lead to marriage. Magnolia processes this, noting that her older brother already has a private tutor for the academy. A dreadful realization dawns on her. The system is designed to end in matrimony for women of her station. She then asks Lila at what age she will receive a private tutor. The question flusters the maid, who stammers that it might be too early for her. Lacking the authority to answer further, Lila suggests Magnolia look for books in the library before hastily rushing out of the room. As the maid flees, Magnolia presses a hand to her forehead, distressed. It's become painfully clear that, judging by how she's being treated, she is the black sheep of the family. Beside her, the cheerful, freckled maid begins to sweat nervously. Elsewhere, 2 other maids discuss the young lady's recent behavior. One comments on how curious she has been lately. The other agrees, admitting that the girl's constant questioning has made her curious as well, before addressing her companion by name, Rosa. Lady Magnolia fixes her gaze on the maid, asking with unnerving calm if there is some problem with her desire to study. The attendant, visibly flustered, quickly denies any such issue. Magnolia simply acknowledges her answer, her expression unreadable. She then brightly suggests they go for a walk. The maid, relieved, agrees that it won't be a problem. Internally, however, Magnolia reflects that while the staff doesn't seem to openly hate her, a subtle distance remains. As she walks, her thoughts turn inward. She questions the unfair treatment she endures, but realizes that asking more questions will only make the maid suspicious. The solution becomes clear. If she could read and write, she could use the library herself. She resolves to find a way to learn, recalling her promise not to cause trouble for Rosa. Her contemplation is cut short as she looks up, down the grand, sunlit hallway. She spots a familiar figure walking towards them, her brother. With a bright smile, she calls out a greeting. He is in the middle of his sword practice, striking a training dummy with a solid thud, and his expression immediately sours at the interruption. He internally seethes, identifying his approaching sibling as his detestable brother, Brian Chris Gilmore. He wonders why his little sister is coming his way, assuming she's just there to flaunt her carefree life. His irritation manifests as a condescending smile. He remarks how nice it must be for her to simply play around all day, then immediately launches into a complaint about his own burdens, the pressure to meet their father's expectations, and the endless studying he must endure. He continues his monologue, declaring this a trial on his path to knighthood. Magnolia, initially thinking he's just boasting, suddenly realizes this is a perfect opportunity. Just then, the maid suggests they leave, as Brian is expected by Lady Daphne. Seizing the moment, Magnolia adopts a sweet, friendly demeanor, startling her brother by affectionately calling out to him. Outside the study, three of the maids watch with expressions of deep concern, worried about the outcome of the young lady's bold plan. Inside, Magnolia bursts into the room with a cheerful wave, greeting her brother with an enthusiastic, "Nice to meet you." Her brother, Brian, stands stiffly, holding a book and looking utterly bewildered by her sudden appearance. He isn't the only one confused. An elderly, stern-looking woman questions who the little girl is. The maid, Rosa, steps forward to explain, introducing the child as Lady Magnolia, Lord Brian's younger sister. Rosa apologizes profusely, adding that Magnolia absolutely refused to be separated from her brother, to which Magnolia happily agrees. She then turns her full attention to the tutor, formally introducing herself as Magnolia, daughter of the Gilmore Marquis family, and addressing the woman as Lady Daphne. With a charming, one-eyed wink, she politely asks for permission to stay near her brother, promising to be quiet. Brian, still processing the situation, can only murmur his sister's name in confusion. Despite her outward confidence, Magnolia is inwardly terrified. Lady Daphne's gaze is intensely menacing, but the little girl steels her resolve. She cannot back down now. She must stay here to learn more about this world, starting with reading and writing. Her plan is simple. She will pretend to be merely curious, using that as an excuse to enter the library. She knows just sitting there would be boring, so she'll bring a slate and chalk. As she thinks this, Lady Daphne observes her for a moment before giving her consent, stating that as long as Magnolia remains quiet, she doesn't mind. With that settled, Lady Daphne turns her back and walks toward the chalkboard, formally beginning the lesson. She instructs Lord Brian to take his seat and begin with the previous week's assignment. He responds with a polite, "Thank you very much." He and Magnolia take their seats at their desks. With her slate and chalk ready, Magnolia is filled with determination, ready to dive into the world of learning, starting from the very basics. The first section of the lesson is poetry. The lesson proceeds, with Lady Daphne lecturing at the front of the room. Magnolia sits attentively, while Brian appears to struggle or lose focus over time. As she works, Magnolia glances over at her brother. She finds Lady Daphne's lesson quite easy to understand, yet Brian seems to have zero motivation, resting his chin on his hand with a bored expression. She stares at the slate where she has written her name, Magnolia, recognizing a letter that resembles an. Nearby, the tutor, Lady Daphne, remarks aloud that children of this age typically prefer sports over studying, prompting a look of confusion from the young girl. Her apparent skill draws immediate attention. With a strained expression, Magnolia realizes she let her guard down. Lady Daphne turns, surprised, and asks if she can write. Her brother, Brian, looks over in shock, demanding she focus on her own assignment. Magnolia clenches a small fist, frustrated with her mistake. This sudden outburst attracts the notice of another man in the room, who wears a monocle and stares intently. In a moment of panic, Magnolia, depicted as a simple, trembling creature, explains that she was merely copying what Lady Daphne had pointed to earlier. The man coolly asks if her copy is correct. His question hangs in the air for a moment before he praises her, remarking that it's impressive she could write it just by looking. Trembling with relief, Magnolia stammers out a thank you, internally sighing at the close call. After the tense moment passes, the lesson moves on to arithmetic. Magnolia observes the symbols for addition, subtraction, and multiplication, realizing they're similar to the Roman and Greek numerals of her past life. She reflects that while much is different in this world, these familiar elements make learning easier. She resolves to simply trace the letters and avoid drawing any more attention to herself. As the lesson shifts again, this time to dance, Magnolia decides it is time to leave. She reasons that complaining might cost her future opportunities to observe. Thanking Lady Daphne for her time, she turns to go, but the man with the monocle calls out for her to wait. Lady Daphne catches the girl, gently chiding that any more activity will disturb her brother. He stops her not to dismiss her, but to offer her a writing slate. Magnolia looks up, surprised, and asks if it is truly all right, as she is not one of his students. The man reassures her that it is a supply from the Marquis family and that they have spares. He elaborates that since it is for studying, there is no issue with her taking one. He then presents another gift, a set of wooden tags with letters carved into them. With a slight smile, he encourages her to take these as well. As she accepts the gifts, Lady Daphne approaches. The tutor explains that the wooden tags are a chart of letters and numbers, something she gives to all her students. She gently pats Magnolia's head, praising her for behaving so well and stating that a student like her is always welcome. She then smiles warmly, observing that Brian seems to stay seated and behave properly when his sister is present. In the background, Brian lets out a sudden sneeze. Lady Daphne extends a formal invitation to Magnolia, telling her to feel free to join them again anytime. She clutched the new slate to her chest, beaming with gratitude. This was the perfect excuse she needed. With newfound determination, she hunched over her desk, dedicating all her effort to her studies. Her dedication was absolute. Days were spent practicing letters and numbers, often studying until she fell asleep right at her desk, surrounded by her learning materials. 3 months later, her efforts granted her access to the grand family library. She gazed in awe at the towering shelves, marveling at the sight. Her tutors explained that her country, the Kingdom of Ascald, was considered one of the 3 great nations. They instructed her that the second floor was a study room she was forbidden from entering, and she eagerly agreed. Her lessons delved into the continent's history, a land rife with skirmishes that had culminated in a war lasting 300 years. She learned, with a sense of wonder, that it was the previous king and her very own grandfather who had brought the long conflict to an end. The history lesson continued, revealing that in recognition of his role, her grandfather was granted additional noble titles and the territory of Azenda. Subsequently, her father inherited the Gilmore family name and all the lands associated with it. The full weight of this lineage crashed down on her. She was the daughter of an incredibly high-ranking noble. The realization was a frustrating one. Her life would be entangled in politics, destined for a strategic marriage far from ordinary. Overwhelmed, she slammed her head on the desk, groaning at how annoying it all was. She pushed herself up, a grimly determined expression on her face. A political marriage, she conceded, was at least understandable for someone of her status. But she mused that things would be different if she were merely an uneducated child confined to the estate. Her thoughts then turned to her current situation. There was a definite intention behind her isolation. She wondered if it was simply because her parents were busy or if she was unwanted. Whether it stemmed from malice or circumstance, she couldn't be sure. As she sat alone with these thoughts, the sound of footsteps drew her attention. A pair of polished boots stopped nearby, and a male voice questioned why such a young child had to endure something so unreasonable. She looked up to see a young man in a formal uniform. He looked down at the book she was reading and commented on how admirable it was. A faint smile touched his lips as he added, "It's been a while, hasn't it?" She looks up from her book at the young man, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. He offers a polite, almost serene smile and addresses her with startling familiarity, hoping she is in good spirits before calling her father. The title sends a jolt through her. She knows this face. A dreadful realization dawns upon her. The root of all her future misfortunes has just appeared. This is Gerald Silas Gilmore, the 57th head of the prestigious Gilmore family and a marquis in the Kingdom of Ascard. A man of immense martial prowess and intellect, he once saved the kingdom in a past war and has protected his house and territory since childhood. He embodies the family spirit. To the small girl looking up from the floor, this formidable man is not just a noble lord. He is her father, the very person who has placed her under house arrest. He approaches his daughter, remarking with a weary smile that it has been over 3 months since they last saw each other, due to his busy schedule. As he turns to leave, he pauses, asking about her studies and the book she holds. With a bright, innocent smile, Magnolia informs him that she is reading about beans and vegetables. He finds her choice amusing, noting that it sounds tasty before asking what else she is looking at. She points to a book about flowers. He observes that the other books in the room, on subjects like history and law, seem too difficult for her. Magnolia cheerfully explains that she brought them because they're the same ones her brother reads. Her father muses on this, realizing she is at an age to imitate her sibling. He reflects on how the daughter who was supposed to be confined has found a way around the restrictions he likely put in place, such as the deliberately modified, hard-to-open library door. She looks up at him, her expression unreadable. He realizes her smile doesn't reach her eyes. She is on high alert. He forces a smile of his own as she asks if he has the day off from work. He confirms that he took the day off because of a backlog of work in the territory. Understandingly, Magnolia tells him to go ahead and return to his duties, acknowledging how busy he must be. Her perception seems to catch him off guard. The maids watching from a distance are overcome with emotion at the exchange. Moved, Lord Gerald apologizes to his daughter. He gently places a hand on her head and proposes they have a meal together when he finds some free time. The maids are overjoyed by this breakthrough. Lord Gerald looks down at his daughter, who seems lost in thought. He asks her what is wrong, but she simply says it is nothing, straightens the bow in her hair, and bids him a good day as he departs. As he walks down a long, stately corridor, he comes across an elderly woman with spectacles. He greets her formally as Countess Daphne. She returns the greeting, addressing him as Lord Gerald. They walk together, and he thanks her for her hard work with his son's lessons, apologizing for any trouble Brian might have caused. The Countess dismisses his apology, remarking that such behavior is only natural for a boy of Lord Brian's age. She then shifts the conversation to Magnolia, noting that she has heard the young lady now frequents the library. The monocled man accompanying her confirms this, adding that while Magnolia initially started visiting to follow her brother, she has recently shown great enthusiasm for learning court etiquette as well. She began by declaring to Lord Gerald that his daughter is a genius. Her pace of learning simply extraordinary. The Lord, however, seemed to dismiss the praise, stifling a laugh as he conceded that while it was a kind offer, with the right education, her potential could be even greater. The Countess pressed on, insisting that with such talents, Magnolia could grow into a splendid young lady. Yet, she tempered her enthusiasm with a note of caution, reminding him that the girl's health had been poor until the previous year and that she did not wish to push her too hard. Her tone then sharpened with a warning. If that were to happen, his daughter's future would surely be as the young lady of the Stuyvesant family. In response, Lord Gerald's expression shifted into a knowing smile. He countered smoothly, remarking that the future of that particular young lady is said to be absolutely wonderful, posing the question directly back to Countess Daphne. His smile widened into a sharp, cunning grin as he brought a finger to his lips, a clear, unspoken command for silence. For those very reasons, he continued, he required that all matters concerning his daughter be kept strictly confidential. The Countess could only stare back, a sheen of sweat on her brow, clearly taken aback by his veiled threat. Visibly flustered, the Countess remarked that her words had been meaningless. She abruptly excused herself to attend to her next student and departed down the hall. Watching her leave, Lord Gerald mused on how rare it was to see her so invested, but quickly dismissed the thought for a more pressing concern. He stood motionless, his mind racing with a single, urgent question. When had information about that existence leaked out, his thoughts shifted to his daughter. Until recently, Magnolia had never met or spoken with anyone besides her maid. He had thought his instructions to Rosa were clear. He could not allow this matter to draw any more attention than it already had. He recalled how she used to be a vacant child, utterly lacking in emotional response. But now, as an image of her with a sly, knowing smirk flashed in his mind, he had to admit she was like a completely different person. And if that was the case, the implications were profound. From a window, Magnolia gazes out, her small hand gripping the frame. A silent, desperate call for her father echoes in her mind. As fragmented images of armored soldiers and destruction flash before her, a new thought takes root. If her own small destiny could be altered, could the future itself also be changed? That question unleashes a torrent of harrowing images. A city, her home, is reduced to smoldering ruins under a dark sky. An army of grim, heavily armored soldiers stands assembled, their faces obscured by helmets and shadows. Above them all looms a sinister figure, his eyes burning with malice from beneath a curtain of dark hair. At the heart of this desolation, a tiny, solitary Magnolia sits amidst the rubble, a stark portrait of loss and defeat. A maid hums a tune while carrying a basket of laundry through a grand hallway. Suddenly, a door bursts open with a loud doom, and Lord Gerald rushes past, startling her and another maid. The second maid cries out in shock, wondering what is happening as her lord disappears down the corridor. The lord's face is a mask of dark self-reproach as he thinks how foolish it was to expect something from a young girl. He stops before his children, Magnolia and Brian, and apologizes for having trusted her, even a little. Magnolia assures him it's no problem. A moment later, a smile touches his lips as he chuckles, remarking that she says some amusing things. Later, in his study, he realizes he doesn't have enough documents. He sighs, admitting to himself that he had wanted to ask Magnolia directly why she was avoiding him, but knew she would have simply dodged the question. As he wonders what to do next, his butler retrieves a book from a high shelf while Magnolia stands nearby, lost in thought. The butler turns to her, asking why she is so out of breath. Catching her breath, she apologizes and explains that the Lord urgently needs some documents. He accepts the papers, internally chiding himself for his lack of composure. He reflects that a Lord's butler must always carry himself with poise, a lesson that stings to recall. Meanwhile, Magnolia examines the documents, deducing that since they were near her father's desk, they must be work-related papers he is hiding. As the maid, Rosa notes that a shelf was left unlocked. Another maid named Daisy cheerfully approaches Magnolia. She tells the young lady it's time to return to her room as the sun is setting. Daisy then smiles brightly, remarking that Magnolia has been in a great mood. She excitedly reveals that the Lord has invited Magnolia to a dinner party for the very first time, proof that he thinks of her even when busy. Magnolia, however, looks utterly unimpressed. Daisy's excitement continues to bubble over as she declares that today they will finally get to eat together. She asks if it isn't exciting and announces she is heading to the kitchen to help with preparations. Magnolia quietly affirms, yes, it is. Later that evening, however, Magnolia sits alone at the long dining table. She listlessly picks at her food, small hiccups escaping her lips as she holds back tears. The one truly crying is Daisy, who sobs while Rosa tries to comfort her. Daisy laments, asking why the Lord would make such a promise when he had already left for the territory. From her seat, Magnolia calmly addresses the distraught maid. She tells Daisy it's all right, explaining that her father never specified they would be together today. She then turns her gaze to Rosa. I knew that, she says quietly, so I'm not upset. Hearing this, Rosa looks down at the small, composed child, her own eyes filling with tears of profound sorrow and pity. She turns to her maids, a placid smile on her face as she asks why she is being avoided so much. One of them, Daisy, simply addresses her as Milady, while Rosa looks distraught, apologizing for having made her worry again. Magnolia seems to brush it off, accepting the situation. After Rosa wishes her goodnight, Magnolia, now tucked in her large bed, makes a quiet plea, asking if the maid could stay with her just a little longer tonight. But moments later, a fierce determination replaces her vulnerability. She slips out of bed and hastily pulls on her socks, her mind set on a new, urgent purpose. She cracks open her door, peering into the long, silent corridor. Confirming the way is clear, she steels herself to proceed, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Arriving at a section of the wall, she realizes this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. She believes her father is gone and that this hidden shelf was left unlocked so she could discover his true intentions. Though she feels bad for her maid and apologizes to her tutor, she knows this is for her own sake. The panel is heavy, but she resolves to open it as long as it's not completely sealed. With a determined grimace, she throws all of her weight into pulling the ornate, hidden doorway open. The passage reveals a vast, dark library. She recalls that the library is usually open for servants to study, which is why she waited until so late. A flicker of anxiety crosses her mind at the thought of someone showing up now. Now, cloaked in shadow, she pulls open a small drawer. As it clicks open, her eyes widen. Her mission is clear. Copy down its contents and do it quickly. On the floor with the book, she identifies it as a ledger detailing the income and expenses of the last few years, noting that it seems fine. A peculiar entry for cat food expenses catches her eye. Realizing she has no time to read it all, she decides to copy everything to examine later. Suddenly, a light spills into the room from above. A man holding a lantern peers into the darkness, his voice cutting through the silence as he asks, "Is someone there?" He holds the lantern high, his gaze sweeping the dark corridor. He notes with some surprise that the shelf isn't locked. Hidden below, Magnolia freezes, her breath caught in her throat. After a tense moment, the man dismisses his unease as mere imagination and turns, his footsteps receding down the hall. Once the danger has passed, she returns her focus to the family ledger spread before her. The figures confirm her suspicions, reminding her of the maid's hushed conversations. She recalls Rosa expressing dissatisfaction, pointing out that Magnolia is only 3 years old, while Daisy listed the family's exorbitant spending. Lady Wisteria's parties, dresses, and jewelry, alongside Lord Gerald's personal luxury expenses. A grim smile touches her lips as she continues her audit. The ledger details expenses for Wisteria's evening party dress, a special dress for Brian's guests, and even funds for the cat's food and toys. In stark contrast, the entry for her own needs is laughably small, just a few pieces of clothing. The cold realization dawns on her that has always been this way, from the very beginning. An image surfaces in her mind. Her father, mother, and brother standing together, a complete family unit from which she is utterly excluded. She remembers the profound loneliness, the feeling of being despised without reason, not even being allowed to share a meal with them. That memory hardens into a new, unshakable resolve. Her small hand clenches into a tight fist. She decides that if this family cannot even treasure a child, then she will be the one to throw the family away. Their neglect has given her an unexpected freedom. Since no one expects anything from her, she is free to do whatever she wants. Standing barefoot upon the scattered pages of a ledger, she makes a silent vow. She will not let them have their way. Her eyes, gleaming with fierce light, reflect her ultimate goal. She will definitely escape from this house. Waking in her grand bed, the young girl stretches with a yawn. She reaffirms her vow to live freely, but immediately confronts the reality of her situation. there's only so much a 3-year-old can actually do. She begins to formulate a plan for the future. To survive, she will need knowledge of edible wild plants, money for an eventual escape, and the stamina to see it through. She resolves to build her knowledge in the family library. Her thoughts turn to her current allies. She understands that while Rosa and the other maids feel sorry for her, their ultimate loyalty is to the Gilmore family. She must become someone who can live on her own. A sharp knock at the door interrupts her contemplation. A maid enters, announcing that Lady Wisteria has summoned her to the first-floor parlor immediately. On her way, she pauses before a grand, ornate portrait of her family. It depicts her mother, Wisteria Gilmore, seated elegantly beside her father and brother. Looking at the painted image of her mother, she wonders grimly whether the woman is a friend or an enemy. Upon entering the parlor, she is met with a harsh reprimand. Her mother, Lady Wisteria, taps a fan against her hand and demands to know why she was dawdling, calling her a slow, clumsy child. Her brother, Brian, stands nearby, his face contorted in annoyance at their mother's words. Completely ignoring her daughter, Lady Wisteria turns her attention to the finery laid out before her. She admires a dress and a necklace, declaring that she will be taking them. The young girl stands in stunned silence, realizing with a jolt that today was the day the Campbell Company was supposed to be visiting for her fitting. While her brother is being measured by a tailor, she watches from a distance, noting how nobles have everything sewn for them from scratch. Lady Wisteria then calls over Rosa, ordering her to ensure that child, referring to the small, bear-like creature, doesn't come any closer. In a small act of defiance, Brian sticks his tongue out at his mother. When it is finally her turn, the atmosphere is thick with tension. She overhears a maid gossiping about how flustered she looks. Internally, she solidifies her assessment. Her mother is the enemy. The tailor tries to break the silence, asking what color she would like, but she feels paralyzed by the stares, realizing she was only summoned to be told to stay away. After a moment's hesitation, she quietly requests black or navy. The tailor, likely expecting a simple choice, asks if there are any specific length requirements. She surprises him with a detailed and practical request: a simple, loose A-line shape, ankle length, made from the same quality fabric as her current clothes. She asks for pintucks at the waist and chest, and a ribbon or drawstring, so the dress can be adjusted as she grows. The tailor's assistant looks on, utterly astonished. Her reasoning impresses the craftsman, who enthusiastically agrees to her design. She explains that since they are kindly making it for her, she wants to be able to wear it with care for a long time as she grows. The tailor is visibly moved, calling her words kind and respectful. Internally, however, she admits her true motive is to keep expenses minimal to avoid future complaints. She continues her discussion with the tailor, requesting 2 ready-made cotton blouses. When asked about the color, she pragmatically declines bright tones, explaining that they stain too easily for a child. Her mother, Lady Wisteria, overhears this and scoffs, questioning why her daughter would pick colors fit for a servant and calling her an unlovable child. The tailor clears his throat, ignoring the woman's cruelty, and thanks Magnolia for her consideration. Turning away from the tense exchange, Magnolia approaches her maid, Rosa, with a new question. She asks if sewing is considered part of a noble's training. Rosa's eyes sparkle with excitement as she confirms that many noble ladies do indeed learn skills like embroidery. Delighted by the young lady's interest, Rosa eagerly offers to teach her everything she knows. Magnolia is overcome with joy, stammering her thanks. With her new goal in mind, she turns back to the tailor. She clarifies that it isn't for clothes, but asks if she might have some leftover fabric and thread to use for practice. The nearby maids listen, their expressions softening with affection. The maids realize her intention. They're deeply moved by her kindness, understanding that she wants to learn sewing to make something for them as a gift. Her mother, however, is unimpressed. Lady Wisteria declares that it is embarrassing to give a gift handmade by a child, insisting that if Magnolia wants to give a thank-you gift, she should buy something proper. But for the maids, an item handmade by the young lady they cared for would be a priceless treasure. Ignoring her mother's words, Magnolia puffs her cheeks with quiet resolve. The tailor gently refutes the lady's harsh assessment, assuring Magnolia that such a gift would surely become a treasured keepsake. He then presents her with a small box, warning her that its contents can be dangerous and that she must follow her teacher's instructions carefully. He formally introduces himself as Simon Campbell, head of the Campbell Trading Company. Taking the opportunity, Magnolia whispers her plan to him. She will learn embroidery. With surprising boldness, she asks if he would buy her creations if they are well made. Amused and impressed, Simon laughs and agrees, promising that if her work is good enough to sell, his company will gladly purchase it from her. She watched as the tailor, Simon Campbell, beamed with pleasure. With a hand to his chest, he enthusiastically confirmed their arrangement, assuring her that his company would be waiting for her work anytime she was ready. Later, her gaze fell upon a grand, gilded portrait hanging on the wall. It depicted her mother in a magnificent gown, standing beside her brother, Brian. As she looked at the painting, a single thought solidified her resolve. She hoped this new venture would somehow help with the money she so desperately needed. While observing a portrait of a woman with pink hair and crimson eyes, One of the maids remarks that Lady Magnolia strongly resembles her great-grandmother. Magnolia, however, notes the absence of her own portrait, though there is one of a cat. The maids confirm the striking family resemblance. She is taken aback by this revelation. Internally, she reflects that she had always assumed she was hated for being an illegitimate child. But this new information suggests otherwise. A man with a monocle, who had arrived a month and a half after her birth, dismisses any doubt, stating that her postnatal expression proved her lineage. He asserts that her hair color can only belong to the Gilmore family within the kingdom of the Skald. Magnolia's attention then shifts to another large portrait, this one depicting 3 men, and she asks who they are. The man explains they are Lord Gerald's father and younger brother. He elaborates, identifying the stern-faced older man in the portrait as her grandfather, Marquis Sells of the Frontier. Magnolia gazes at the image, processing this new piece of her family history. The man then indicates the dark-haired youth in the painting, introducing him as Lord Gerald's younger brother, Lord Claude Allen Gilmore. He continues, explaining that Lord Claude was a war orphan whom Marquis Sells adopted. Magnolia notes to herself that he's the only one with black hair. The man adds that Lord Claude is known throughout the neighboring countries by fearsome titles, the Demon General and the Black Lion of Azinda. Magnolia grimaces, unnerved by such violent nicknames. Deciding that this formidable uncle is not relevant to her immediate concerns, she sets the thought aside. A few days later, her focus is on a new challenge, sewing. She struggles immensely, finding the task demands far more patience than she remembered. A brief memory from her previous life as a child flashes through her mind, a time when she was proud of her clumsy handiwork. With her sewing lesson concluded, she contemplates improving her physical strength. Realizing it's not realistic to copy her brother's sword techniques, she decides to learn basic self-defense for emergencies. She turns to Rosa and asks if there is anyone suitable to teach her. Rosa suggests Lila, who appears at that moment, looking surprised. Magnolia eagerly asks if Lila would be willing. Lila, though she feels it is presumptuous of her, smiles and gladly accepts the task. She explains that she comes from a family of knights and knows a bit about the subject. They agree to head to the garden. The scene then shifts to reveal a startling array of weapons laid out on the ground. Swords, a spiked flail, chains, and more. With a thoughtful and slightly flushed expression, Lila muses over which weapon would best suit the young lady, listing swords, spears, scythes, and even a kuzarigama. Daisy, another maid, looks on in horror, exclaiming that Magnolia is only 3 years old. Lila, however, insists that a careful and crucial selection must be made. She considered the options for the young lady's self-defense. Her fellow maid, Daisy, suggested a halberd to maintain distance in combat, but Magnolia expressed concern that it was far too large. She was also surprised that Lila would carry such a weapon herself. Dismissing the larger weapon, she decided that hidden weapons might also be suitable. She presented a mace that appeared ordinary at first glance, but hinted at a hidden feature. With a flick of her wrist, a blade sprang from the mace's head. Lila explained that it was a training model with a dulled edge, perfect for teaching the core principle of combat. Strike first to stagger an opponent, then follow up to secure victory. Magnolia stared, wide-eyed, amazed at how intensely her maid was approaching the lesson. Before they could begin with the weapon, however, Lila declared that building a strong body was the first priority. Out on the manor grounds, she announced that they would start by improving Magnolia's basic stamina, beginning with simple stretches. After a period of strenuous exercise, she praised the young lady's hard work and suggested a short break, offering to fetch a towel and tea. Magnolia, meanwhile, was utterly spent, panting that the training was incredibly difficult. She collapsed onto the stone path, reflecting that being cooped up in her room had turned her into a weak 3-year-old. It wasn't as if she had exercised much in her past life, but this was a new level of physical frailty. As she rested near the garden bushes, she spotted 2 unfamiliar men hiding. One bore a scar on his face, a clear sign he was no ordinary citizen. Wondering where the old gardener was, her thoughts were cut short as a hand shot out from the foliage and grabbed her arm. Her mind instantly recalled Lila's words, "Strike first to win." A memory of her brother, Brian, echoed the same sentiment. Hit your opponent. If they flinch, don't hesitate. Clutching her training mace, she steadied her breathing. With a surge of adrenaline, a single, clear thought dominated her mind. Finish them off. Letting out a fierce cry, she launched herself into the air, raising the mace high to strike down at the 2 startled intruders below. Her training mace connects with a solid thud against the intruder's head. The man, caught completely by surprise, stumbles forward, exclaiming at the suddenness of the attack. He barely has time to register what happened before the force of the blow sends him reeling. He grips the barefaced, mace now pressed against his skull, sweat beading on his temple as he internally curses the situation. His scarred companion looks on, his initial surprise turning to recognition as he notes the little girl's unique hair color. Meanwhile, Magnolia, having delivered the blow, finds herself wondering just who this man she attacked truly is. In the estate garden, a mysterious man is suddenly encountered. Magnolia stumbles back in alarm, a gasp escaping her lips. The man looks down, his eyes narrowing as he notes her distinct hair an eye color, a flicker of recognition dawning on him. In the distance, her brother Brian and his tutor walk away, completely unaware of the unfolding situation. The man lunges forward with startling speed, his face a mask of grim determination. Before he can reach her, the maid Lila flashes between them, landing gracefully. She accuses the stranger of being a suspicious creep attempting to abduct the young lady. Magnolia, wide-eyed, calls out Lila's name as the maid warns the man to step back. A memory surfaces in Magnolia's mind. This is Lila from the Bernard family, known as Slashing Lila. She stands her ground as the man remarks on her dangerous reputation, recalling stories of a noble lady at the academy who shredded the clothes of unruly boys. Lila coolly replies that she was simply disciplining them. As Magnolia observes the standoff, she notes that the man's stance has no openings. Lila demands to know who he is, her tone making it clear his answer will determine his fate. Their confrontation escalates, Lila drawing two small blades to meet the man's weapon with a sharp clang. Just then, an elderly voice cuts in, declaring, "That's enough." An old gardener, holding Magnolia's small bear-like companion, steps into view, questioning the commotion in the field. The gardener calmly explains to the young lady that he hurt his back and had to leave the work to his apprentice. Lila remains wary. The so-called apprentice then turns, his face splitting into a wide, unsettling grin that stretches from ear to ear, his eyes vanishing into slits. His unnerving expression solidifies their shared feeling. With identical looks of consternation, Magnolia and Lila both come to the same conclusion. He is entirely too suspicious. The man's grin vanishes as he introduces himself simply as Guy. He claims to be there under orders from Lord Selves of the Azinda frontier. Lila, unconvinced, questions a wound on his arm and what appears to be blood on his glove. Guy casually dismisses the injury as an old war wound and the stain as mere fruit juice. Nearby, the small creature in the gardener's arms observes Guy, thinking that even though his answers are coherent, he still feels incredibly shady. The old gardener kneels beside Magnolia, explaining that he grabbed her on instinct when she nearly fell. He points to some plant juice on her clothes, gently advising her not to move too much, as contact with her skin could cause a rash. She listens as the old gardener tries to placate her, insisting that Guy is Lord Selves' right-hand man, and there is nothing to worry about. Ignoring the reassurance, she turns to her maid and asks, "Lila, could I trouble you to fetch a change of clothes?" Lila, though hesitant, understands the unspoken command and agrees to fetch them immediately, earning Magnolia's silent approval. Guy reacts with complete shock to this revelation. He stammers, realizing aloud that she is the young master's daughter, Lady Magnolia. He seems flustered, acknowledging that he knew her father was busy with official duties, but clearly had not expected to meet his child. As Guy explains that calling him a gardener is a stretch, as he usually travels to other countries on various errands, Magnolia processes the new information. She internally confirms that Selves is her grandfather's name and wonders if this man is truly his apprentice. She finds it odd that her own father doesn't seem to know he has a granddaughter, or at least didn't invite her to a debut ceremony. Her eyes gleam with understanding. Looking directly at the man, she cuts to the heart of the matter. "I see. So, basically, you're kind of like a spy, right?" Her small, bear-like companion gasps in surprise at her bluntness. His expression instantly hardens. The man's eyes narrow, his face falling into shadow as he stares back at the young girl, the air growing tense. The old gardener, aghast, raises his trowel and scolds Magnolia, calling her stupid for saying such things. He quickly tries to smooth things over, explaining that the young lady was often sick and doesn't know much about the world. He then turns to Guy, suggesting he tell her about the outside, encouraging Magnolia to ask him anything she wants. This suggestion puts Guy in a difficult position. He protests that the old man is making things tough for him, explaining that his line of work prevents him from sharing such information casually. But his words are lost on Magnolia. Her eyes sparkle with immense fascination as she leans forward, captivated by the single, thrilling word, spy. The gardener's apprentice, Guy, agrees to answer Lady Magnolia's questions if he is able. Pleased, she immediately launches into a series of surprisingly specific inquiries, asking to what extent the movement of people between territories is tracked. She poses a hypothetical. If someone were to secretly enter a monastery or an orphanage in another territory, could they remain there unnoticed? She presses on, her questions becoming more pointed. She asks if a noble child were to go missing, would a trail eventually be found? Could someone sneak through a forest to enter another country? To go to another country, she demands to know, does one need a travel pass, a permit, or some form of identification? Her rapid-fire interrogation overwhelms Guy, who throws up his hands in confusion. He shouts for her to slow down, completely baffled by the nature of her questions. From a distance, the head gardener observes, remarking to himself that almost no one in the mansion can withstand a young lady's relentless barrage of questions. Before he can recover, the maid Lila arrives to interrupt. She informs Magnolia that her bath is ready and it is time to return to her room. Magnolia agrees, but turns to Guy for one last question. Lila reassures her that she can wait, unconcerned. Her final question cuts to the heart of a dark matter. Focusing on orphanage children, she asks if there is any other way for them to be taken in besides adoption. Guy's answer is a simple, direct yes. She notes his instantaneous reply, her expression unreadable. With cold pragmatism, she then asks how much money such a transaction would involve. He explains that the price depends on the child's age and gender, but for a toddler, it would be about 2 or 3 small silver coins. Having received her answer, Magnolia thanks him politely and turns to leave with Lila, leaving Guy to watch them depart, unsettled. As he watches them go, the head gardener approaches, asking what he makes of the girl. Guy calls her unbelievable. The gardener identifies her as Lady Magnolia, eldest daughter of the lord and lady of the house. This information startles Guy, who realizes she lacks a middle name, a standard for nobility. The gardener confirms she was never given one, nor did she have a debut ceremony, treatment for a flawed daughter. He then connects her appearance to another name, Lady Azalea. His mind reels as, elsewhere, Lila explains the situation to the other maids. Lord Gerald's attitude changed after his intended heir, the Count of Barton, suddenly died. He strictly forbade anyone from even speaking of Magnolia's existence. It was only after Brian's birth that he began to recover. Guy, eavesdropping nearby, understands the deep suspicion surrounding the Lord's command to keep his daughter hidden from the world at all costs. He is shaken from his thoughts by the head gardener, who asks why he is being told these secrets. Before Guy can answer, the gardener provides his own reason. As long as Guy is there, he is the gardener's apprentice, and therefore, there is no problem with him knowing. He listened as the head gardener laid out the terms of his employment. He was free to do as he pleased outside of working hours, provided the gardening was done properly. Guy confirmed his understanding, but a sly, calculating look in his eyes revealed his true intention to proceed exactly as he saw fit. With his cover established, he began his observation of the mansion's interior. Leaning against a wall with his arms crossed, he watched 2 maids retreat down a long, opulent corridor, his gaze sharp and analytical. His thoughts returned to the information the head gardener had shared about the family. The gardener had explained that the mother is obsessed with fashion and her son, showing no interest in her daughter whatsoever. The father, Lord Gerald, was described as being constantly tied up with official duties, his attention always fixed on documents and state affairs. However, the gardener offered a different interpretation, suggesting it seemed more like Lord Gerald was deliberately avoiding his daughter. As evidence, he noted that the young lady had been assigned 3 personal maids. These were not ordinary servants. The gardener identified them. The authoritative head maid of the mansion, Lila Bernard, a highly skilled woman from a knightly family, and Daisy Harrison, the daughter of a merchant family with extensive connections. He mulled this over, finding the details inconsistent. For a child who was supposedly shunned, assigning such specifically talented maids seemed contradictory. If the goal was simply to keep her out of sight, any random servants would have sufficed. This was entirely different from the treatment the young master received. His contemplation was shattered when he realized he was being watched. From a nearby doorway, Lord Gerald's sharp eyes were fixed on him. The Lord asked if something was wrong, and Guy flinched, startled by the man's unnerving perceptiveness. Before the tense moment could escalate, a small voice called out, "Good day, Mr. Guy." It was Magnolia, holding a small garden hoe. Guy's demeanor instantly shifted as he threw up a hand in a boisterous, friendly wave, greeting the young lady in return. He leaned in conspiratorially, asking how her information gathering was going, mentioning he had seen her asking questions among the servants. With a slight pout, Magnolia admitted her progress was only a so-so. She continued her barrage of questions, eager to learn everything she could from the new gardener's apprentice. She asked about life outside the estate, about improving her sewing, and even about martial arts. Guy listened intently, a slight smile playing on his lips as he wondered just what this isolated young lady was planning to pull off. Elsewhere, both her brother Brian and her father, Lord Gerald, suddenly grimaced in discomfort as if struck by a sudden affliction. Guy, however, sensed something more profound at play. It wasn't mere curiosity driving the young lady. The feeling culminated in a massive sneeze from Brian, who quickly excused himself to head inside. The small white creature, watching nearby, was left to wonder what had just happened. Later, Guy reflected on the encounter. He couldn't believe she was merely a 3-year-old driven by simple curiosity. Her questions and demeanor suggested something far more complex. He mulled over her identity, Magnolia Gilmore, the hidden daughter of the family. His investigation concluded for the day. Guy reported back to his master, remarking that he had an interesting story to tell. The master listened, his expression severe, as he considered the implications. He questioned whether the existence of Magnolia, hidden away in her isolated residence, would finally be brought into the light. Having honed her sewing skills, Magnolia presents a piece of delicate, flower-embroidered lace. The recipient, Lila, is stunned, asking if the gift is truly for her before thanking the young lady profusely. Nearby, the small white creature praises Magnolia's remarkable progress over just a few months, while Lila marvels that the embroidery looks professionally done. Magnolia, however, remains focused on her goal, thinking that her work is still not good enough to sell and support herself. Overcome with emotion, Lila clutches the fabric to her chest, tears in her eyes, and declares she will frame it to be treasured as a family heirloom. Daisy, looking on, exclaims that Lila received one as well. As the maids share the happy moment, Magnolia continues her studies in the library. Her research confirms her fears. This world is inhabited by magical beasts and insects, making the idea of escaping to a forest an unrealistic and dangerous prospect for someone of her size. She reflects on the maids' impending departure, noting that their wedding dates have been set. While they may not have been entirely on her side, she hopes the gifts serve as a small repayment for their time. She feels a small sense of satisfaction for having used her own dress as practice material. Her thoughts are then cut short by a troubling realization. The apprentice, Guy, vanished while she was wandering the mansion grounds. This pattern of people close to her disappearing reinforces her belief that her own time in the manor is limited. With grim determination, she vows to do everything she can while she remains, preparing herself to survive on her own no matter where she ends up, even if she's cast out before she can orchestrate her own escape. Her solitary planning is suddenly broken by a cheerful voice. A young woman with dark hair and pigtails appears, greeting her brightly. "Hello there, Lady Magnolia." The girl, who has brought sweets, introduces herself as Lily Morgan. She's a maid in service to the Marquis's wife and is already acquainted with Daisy. It's explained that Lily is the daughter of a baron whose family is struggling financially, which is why she became a maid. She is known as a hard worker. She explains that she has been visiting Magnolia often on her days off, ever since being assigned to the lady of the house. Magnolia expresses concern over her using her precious free time, but Lily dismisses it, saying she loves talking with her. Her tone then shifts as she brings up Lila and Daisy. She admits that while she is happy for them, she feels lonely at the thought of losing two maids she was close to. It is for this reason, she declares, that she plans to volunteer as Magnolia's personal maid. With a bright, earnest smile, Lily formalizes her offer. She wants to serve Magnolia, no matter where she might go, if it isn't a bother. She adds that perhaps it's because she has siblings, but she simply can't bear to leave the young lady alone. Magnolia is taken completely by surprise. She had resigned herself to the fact that people around her only ever disappeared and never imagined she would gain someone new in the mansion. A wave of pure joy washes over her, and a wide, heartfelt smile spreads across her face as she thinks, "Thank you. I'm so happy." She was startled from her emotional state when Lily slammed her hands on the table, crying out that she simply could not forgive it. The outburst surprised both Magnolia and her small companion, who looked on with confusion. The new maid continued, her voice filled with indignation, declaring that treating such a brave and kind young lady in this manner was not how a family should behave. Becoming flustered by her own forwardness, Lily admitted that she had spoken too much and that her words were inappropriate for the head of the house. Nevertheless, she stood firm, stating that even if she were punished, she would not take back her feelings on the matter. Magnolia, however, gently calmed her down. She thanked Lily for getting angry on her behalf, but expressed that it would make her sad if Lily were to be scolded. With a soft smile, she apologized for the trouble. Later, over tea, she guided the conversation, pointing out that Lily's earlier phrasing suggested she also found the situation strange. Magnolia surmised that Lily must have already heard about her circumstances from the other servants. She began to explain the customs of a scald. It was general practice for noble children to begin their education around age 7, but for families of count rank and higher, the standards were more demanding, and education often began even earlier. Furthermore, she added the political context. With the prince having been born 5 years ago, other noble families had already started bride education for their daughters. A girl of Magnolia's age and high status would ordinarily be a top candidate for the position of princess consort. Despite all this, she revealed, her existence was being completely hidden. She recalled the gardener mentioning that she had never even had a proper debut ceremony. Lila, who was also present, confirmed the gravity of this omission. She explained to Lily that for high-ranking nobles, a debut ceremony on their first birthday is so crucial that not holding one isn't even considered an option. Lily then elaborated on the rare exceptions. A debut might be postponed due to poor health, but if the child's condition was not expected to improve, they might be raised in seclusion on a remote estate or in a convent, only to be married off far away later in life. She continued her explanation, noting that even if a noble girl is educated in a convent, she is typically brought back home before marriage, as being wed from a convent is considered dishonorable. As she spoke, a vision of young Lord Brian, seemingly crushed under the weight of his studies, flashed by, a stark example of a standard education. Lily then began to tell a story about a certain young man who, upon coming of age and facing a sudden inheritance, humbly stated that due to his inexperience, he could not possibly accept such a heavy responsibility. This young man shocked everyone by requesting only a minor post, intending to focus on local governance. Lily explained that the royal palace was in chaos at the time, and everyone had expected him to become the next chancellor. Impressed, Magnolia remarked on how much Lily knew, only for the maid to reveal with a laugh that the man in the story was her own father, a senior official who had caused quite a stir. The tale of political maneuvering brought to mind another, more forceful refusal. A powerful lord, his face a mask of fury, declared his intent to distance himself from the state. Despite the pleas of his retainers, he stood firm, rejecting any formal announcements and comparing such tactics to a surprise attack on an enemy. That same lord, Marquis Selves, was now storming through a hallway, demanding to know why his attendant, Guy, hadn't reported his granddaughter's birthday sooner. He lamented that he had to rush from the Margrave's domain in just 2 days, seething over the fact that his son-in-law, Gerald, had kept the girl a secret for 3 whole years. Guy, however, found the situation amusing, remarking on the funny sight of 2 grown men struggling to find a gift for a little girl. Admitting he had no idea what to get, he simply urged the Marquis onward. The Marquis growled in frustration, but Guy calmly pointed out that it wasn't his fault. He suggested that if the Marquis had acted the moment he realized his son-in-law was avoiding him, he would have figured things out much sooner, adding that he should have shown his true face from the beginning. Overwhelmed, the Marquis confessed his deep-seated guilt. He felt responsible for leaving young Gerald in charge of the territory during wartime, understanding the boy's fear of being hated. He recounted how his poor granddaughter was ignored by her family, dressed in shabby clothes, and was nearly sent away with a fake plan to marry a low-ranking noble. Guy listened, conceding that while he had explained the situation, it was always faster to see for oneself. And see he would. Back in Magnolia's room, the young girl stared at a portrait, recognizing the man as her grandfather, Lord Selves. At that very moment, the door opened, and the real Marquis Selves, accompanied by Guy, stepped into the room. Magnolia froze, speechless. Her grandfather's stern face softened as he looked down at her. "Ah," he began, "I am your grandfather." Taking a small, deliberate step forward, Magnolia introduced herself by name. With perfect composure, she wished him well and asked him to please take care of her. The formal, polite greeting rendered the powerful Marquis utterly stunned and emotional. She is suddenly crushed in an overwhelming hug by her grandfather, Marquis Selves, who bellows her name with raw emotion. Her father, Lord Gerald, shouts a warning that he'll break her bones. Nearby, a young man with dark hair watches the intense scene, thinking to himself that he seriously thought he was going to die from the tension. As the Marquis releases her, the young man introduces himself with a gentle smile as Claude Allen Gilmore. Magnolia feels a strange sense of familiarity with him, despite it being their first meeting. Her grandfather then proudly presents his gift, a large piece of dried meat. She gratefully accepts the unusual offering. Her grandfather sighs, apologizing that he couldn't provide a more thoughtful gift for her special day. The exchange leaves Claude and Lord Gerald watching awkwardly, whispering to each other about whether she is genuinely happy with such a strange present. His word about a special day trigger a shocking realization for Magnolia. Her mind freezes as the pieces fall into place. She looks up at her grandfather, stunned, as a single question forms in her mind. Is today her birthday? The thought propels her into motion. Without another word, she turns and sprints away down the corridor, leaving everyone behind in stunned silence. Meanwhile, her father, Lord Gerald, uses the distraction to slip away. He walks alone down a sunlit garden path, leaning heavily on his cane. Having returned, Magnolia sees her grandfather also preparing to depart and desperately calls out for him to wait. Her father watches from a distance, remarking coolly that the Marquis certainly took his time arriving. Before the Marquis can take another step, his path is blocked by a young man in a formal uniform. The man places a firm hand on the Marquis's arm, halting his departure. This intervention ignites a terrifying, silent fury within the Marquis. His face contorts into a snarl of pure rage, the air crackling with menace. Magnolia, Claude, and her small companion watch, frozen in terror, as the enraged demon general's attack seems imminent. In a grand hall, Lord Claude frantically searches, demanding to know where his brother Gerald has gone. The events leading to this moment began with the strange behavior of Magnolia's father. Her grandfather, Marquis Selves, explains that for the past 3 years, they were completely cut off from the Gilmore domain. Finding this suspicious, he dispatched an agent named Guy to investigate. The Marquis continues, revealing that Guy's intelligence operation inside the mansion discovered that all of the original servants had already been dismissed. As she listens, Magnolia realizes this must have been when her own existence was first discovered by outsiders. Seeing her quiet contemplation, Lord Claude, who holds her in his arms, worries that the topic is too complicated for her. She looks up at him and firmly states that she doesn't mind, promising to ask if there's anything she doesn't understand. A memory of her father, Lord Gerald, surfaces, his hand clenched in frustration. He had apologized, admitting that he avoided interfering directly to prevent worsening the relationship, and as a result, noticed the truth far too late. Magnolia looks up with an expression of sorrow. She continues to listen as Lord Claude speaks, admitting that if anyone is at fault, he is just as guilty. He muses that his adopted brother must have had a difficult time. Looking up at him, Magnolia finally asks, "So, from now on, what will happen to me?" He looks down at her gently and explains that her grandfather, the Margrave Selves, will likely take custody of her. The realization hits Magnolia, and her face fills with fear. Seeing her terror, Claude quickly tries to reassure her, acknowledging how frightening it must be for strange men to suddenly appear and declare they will live together. Her fear vanishes in an instant, replaced by a bright, determined expression. Clasping her hands eagerly, she tells her uncle that in that case, there is something she would like to ask of him. Claude looks down, confused by her sudden shift, while the imposing figure of the Marquis looms with grim purpose. The scene cuts to a dynamic clash. Marquis Sel swings his sheathed sword with immense force, meeting the wooden training sword of his grandson, Brian. The impact is powerful, and Brian grits his teeth, struggling to hold his ground against the veteran warrior. The young boy, however, is not overwhelmed. With focused eyes and surprising skill, he parries the blow and repositions himself, ready for the next exchange as he stands alone against his grandfather at the far end of the hall. The two combatants charge, their weapons meeting once more. As the Marquis roars, Lord Claude watches in horror, demanding to know what they are doing. Beside him, Magnolia calmly clarifies that it is a sparring match, explaining that the Gilmore family made its name through military achievements. It always ends up like this. She watches the violent sparring, her face a mask of terror. Her uncle, Claude, holds her close and attempts to reassure her, explaining that for the combatants, this is merely a game. She cries out in disbelief, questioning what kind of dangerous game it could possibly be. The game rages on. Marquis Sells presses his attack with immense force, locking blades with Brian. As he strains, he roars a name, not at the boy before him, but at an unseen figure, Gerald. The two swordsmen remain locked in a powerful stalemate, their feet digging into the stone of the courtyard as they struggle for dominance. Their faces are mere inches apart. A silent, intense assessment passes between the old warrior and the young boy before the Marquis lets out a low hum of consideration. From the sidelines, Claude remarks on Brian's impressive, unwavering strength, noting that his skills haven't dulled despite his father taking a desk job. Brian smiles, returning the compliment to his father. Magnolia, however, remains utterly bewildered by their casual demeanor. The scene shifts into a memory, revealing a past conversation between Lord Gerald and the Marquis. Gerald admits that while drawing sword in the domain is forbidden, he felt it was necessary for an honest talk. He expresses deep regret for past failings that caused hardship, explaining this is why he remains silent about his actions until now. In the memory, a much younger Magnolia runs happily through a hallway. Within that memory, the Marquis's disapproval is plain. He states firmly that he cannot condone what Gerald is doing to Magnolia. Gerald retorts that the Marquis, as someone who also carries on the Gilmore family traditions, should understand that such actions aren't taken without a significant reason. The Marquis dismisses the idea that this is merely a lecture. He insists his reasoning is beyond the Marquis's comprehension, framing his actions as a parent's right to decide their child's fate and a duty to ensure their happiness. He gestures to the image of a tiny, isolated Magnolia, questioning if a life locked away, unable to even touch her family, could truly be called happiness. The Marquis presses him, asking if it was truly necessary to go so far as to fabricate a flaw and send her to a convent. Gerald's justification is grim. That fate is better than being used up and discarded by the royal family. He dismisses Gerald's opinion of the royalty, declaring that no matter the reason, his actions toward Magnolia are wrong. His gaze then falls to Gerald's hand, and he asks what he is holding. Gerald quickly conceals the object, replying with a terse, "Nothing." His silence is met with a sharp rebuke from Marquis Selves, who questions if Gerald, of all people, has the right to say such things. The Marquis declares himself the one who must correct Gerald's mistakes, warning that he will come to regret his actions more than he can possibly imagine. The Marquis continues his lecture, defining a true Gilmore as someone who becomes a shield for those they protect. He then challenges his son-in-law directly, asking if his method of protecting Magnolia is truly worthy of their family name. Lord Gerald remains silent, his head bowed. Their tense standoff is interrupted by a woman's voice from down the hall, inquiring about the commotion. From a low vantage point, Claude Gilmore looks up towards the sound. Lady Wisteria appears, greeting her father and son with a smile. She mentions hearing their voices and expresses hope that they are well, before asking Claude what brings them for such a sudden visit. The Marquis merely grunts in response. Her cheerful demeanor falters as she senses the tension. The small white creature by Claude's side offers a wide smile, but Wisteria, flustered, simply remarks that she would have prepared something had she known they were coming. Suddenly, her attention is drawn to the end of the hall where Magnolia stands. Claude reacts with shock, demanding his sister return to her room. The Marquis explodes with anger, questioning why Magnolia is dressed so disgracefully and blaming Wisteria for letting her wander. Overwhelmed by her father's fury, Lady Wisteria's eyes well with tears. Lord Gerald steps to her side, quietly urging her to calm herself. The mood in the corridor grows heavy and oppressive. As the adults turn and walk away in a tense procession, Magnolia follows quietly behind them. The Marquis seethes, demanding to know how far his daughter and son-in-law have taken things. Watching the escalating conflict, Magnolia recognizes a crucial opportunity. She realizes she won't get a better chance than this to intervene. With a sharp clap of her hands, Magnolia captures everyone's attention. She declares that this is the perfect moment to settle the matter once and for all. Looking directly at the two men, she announces that she will first address the issue between her father and grandfather. She silences the two men, declaring they can deal with their issues later. With a determined expression, she announces her intention to discuss the topic at hand, her own treatment. She presents a stack of papers, explaining they are a partial extract of the household budget for the last decade, and that the originals are available for verification in the library. Her uncle, Claude, looks on in surprise while her father, Gerald, lets out a sudden sneeze. As her family examines the documents, her father begins to read the figures aloud. He notes that Brian's annual clothing expense is 10 to 15 times higher than Magnolia's, while Wisteria's is over 1,000 times more. His finger then lands on another entry, Primavera, prompting a questioning look from the Marquis. The name, it is revealed, belongs to the mother's dearly cherished cat. Magnolia clarifies, pointing to the specific lines in the budget. One entry is for the cat's feed, and another is for its outfits. The revelation strikes her grandfather, Marquis Selves, who can only stare blankly, the words "a cat" echoing in his mind. The weight of the numbers settles upon the room. Behind her fan, Lady Wisteria's eyes widen as she processes the implication. Her own daughter's value, according to the budget, is a mere fraction of a pet's. Looking up from the papers, she continues her presentation. She concedes that her life was never directly endangered, but the living conditions laid bare in the budget make it difficult to say she was ever treated as true family. She concludes that it's no exaggeration to call herself a burden, predicting a future of being locked away, sent to a convent, or married off for convenience. Her blunt assessment stuns the Marquis. She then adds a sharp, cynical barb, suggesting that if they had sold her to a degenerate, they might have at least turned a profit from her existence. Her father, Gerald, watches her performance with a keen eye. He recognizes that her logic is flawed and full of holes. He understands that if they were to calmly dissect her argument, she would easily be lectured into submission and lose the debate. But she has already anticipated this weakness. Realizing a logical debate is unwinnable, she resolves to use the most powerful words she can muster. She declares that, in short, she is an unnecessary person. She explains that when children are abandoned, they are typically sold or discarded, often ending up in orphanages. The price for such a child, she states, is a mere 2 or 3 small silver coins. With her point made, she turns directly to her father. "Father," she says softly, "your hand, please." As he extends his hand, she gently places the coins into his palm. His eyes widen in shock at the gesture, and even her Uncle Claude is taken aback, murmuring his gratitude. The small silver coins rest heavily in his palm. "This," she declares, her voice resonating with the finality of her judgment, "is what your child was worth." His eyes widened in disbelief, the silver coins cold in his palm. Magnolia's voice, small but firm, cut through the stunned silence. She declared that she had just been bought, and therefore, she was no longer truly there with them. She then turned away, her gaze finding her grandfather, the Marquis Selves, who had knelt down to her level amidst a crowd of stunned onlookers. With a small, formal bow, she announced that she would not trouble the Marquis any longer. With unwavering resolve, Lady Magnolia makes a declaration. She has bought her freedom, she announces, and with this, she will be gone. She presents 3 coins in her small hand, stating that she will no longer be a burden to the Marquis. As she speaks, her stomach lets out an audible growl. The declaration sends Lady Wisteria into a rage. She shrieks at how unbelievably cheeky and awful the girl is. A maid attempts to intervene, but the lady dismisses her, shouting for them to do as they please before storming away. Meanwhile, Lord Gerald calmly explains the terms to a tense Lord Claude. He has calculated Magnolia's living expenses up to this point, noting that food costs are roughly the same as his older brother's. He clarifies that he has only included clothing and miscellaneous costs, excluding education, and adds that if childbirth expenses are to be included, they would need to confirm with a doctor. He then turns his attention to Magnolia, asking if it would be possible to waive those payments. He expresses his belief that settling matters with money is the best way to avoid any lingering resentment. With a gentle expression, he proposes a formal contract that both sides can agree upon. Magnolia looks up at him, her own expression one of confident satisfaction. Later, as Magnolia departs, onlookers comment on the event. One remarks that she is a true Gilmore at heart, despite her appearance. Elsewhere, Marquis Selves asks Lord Gerald if he doesn't intend to scold his son, Claude, for his wild behavior in going along with the arrangement. He answers his own question, wondering aloud how he could possibly rub salt in the wounds of someone so clearly crushed by the outcome. He advises Lord Gerald to simply ensure Claude regrets his actions properly, sighing that lamenting is a privilege for those who deserve it and noting his son's stubbornness. His son, Claude, approaches, attempting to return an item. He insists his father take it back, reminding him that he was the one who gave it to Magnolia. The Marquis raises a hand, firmly stating that it won't be necessary. He dismisses the idea of his brother handling things better, his attention fixed solely on Lord Gerald. More importantly, he demands to know what Gerald had been planning to do with Magnolia. Lord Gerald insists he had no ill intentions, explaining his plan was to send her off with a dowry to marry a low-ranking noble in the countryside. This way, she would not have to frequent the capital. Guy mutters about the unpleasantness of such schemes, but the Marquis remains silent. With a pained expression, Gerald finally apologizes. His son, Claude, is taken aback, questioning the sudden apology. Lord Gerald clarifies that it is not sudden at all. He has simply missed the opportunity to say it for a very long time. The Marquis elaborates on his regret, admitting he pushed too many responsibilities onto Gerald. He recounts passing on the title of Duke at a young age, abandoning his duties to fight on the frontier, and leaving his children on a battlefield where death was imminent. He laments that they rarely had a chance to speak as father and son. He offers a faint smile, remarking that all of this transpired 10 years ago. His father's voice is firm. Even if it's late, he insists, confessing that it was his own pride that kept him from saying anything for so long. He continues his praise, acknowledging that since childhood, Gerald has carried the weight of the family and served their domain well. The Marquis admits that because Gerald was there to protect their home, he could charge into battle without worry. For that, he offers his heartfelt thanks. Looking directly at his son, the Marquis declares, "You are my pride." Gerald sighs, questioning if such words or an apology can fix everything. The Marquis clarifies that he is not apologizing in order to be forgiven. Watching the scene unfold, Guy wipes away a tear, noting that forgiveness won't come so easily. Lord Gerald, composed in his chair, states that from this point forward, the choice rests with Claude. Claude turns his intense gaze back to his father. He demands to know why, on that day, he decided to move to Azinda without consulting him first. In the midst of their tense discussion, Marquis Selves elaborated on the political situation concerning the Principality of Azind. He explained that 20 years ago, it was occupied by a coalition of desert nations. Their own country, which has long served as a buffer state, intervened and reclaimed the territory. He continued, stating that the people of Azinda had endured through the turmoil with great perseverance. It was for this reason he wished to return the land to its people with the respect they deserved, even if the Gilmore family's protection was only temporary. However, the Marquis explained, there were complications. To avoid unnecessary scrutiny from other powerful houses, they had to disperse their power unilaterally. Any sign of coordination would have raised suspicion, especially since factions already existed that opposed the Gilmore's elevation in rank, accusing them of harboring survivors of Azinda's ducal family. His grandson listened intently before questioning the official story. Claude asked if the rumors about the entire ducal family having died were baseless, and if some were, in fact, still alive. The Marquis sighed, conceding the humans fear great power and that paranoia was rampant at the time. Elsewhere, preparations for a journey were underway. A box was packed with a change of clothes, a sewing kit, dried meat, and a vocabulary book from teacher. The sight of these carefully chosen items prompted the thought that there was nothing to complain about. The preparations sent the maid, Daisy, into a fit of tears on a balcony. Sobbing uncontrollably, she declared her intention to go with the young lady. Nearby, the small white creature noted that Guy had provided the dried meat, thinking to itself that it didn't need borrowed things. She turned her tear-streaked face to Lila, who was also quietly crying. Daisy insisted that she was perfectly qualified to act as a guard, then shouted that Lila was engaged and should stay behind. Their emotional outburst was interrupted by Magnolia's calm voice. She reassured the two maids that she would be fine and told them to go be happy together. Behind them, Lily watched with determination, declaring that they should leave the young lady to her. Lily stepped forward, her expression resolute. She confirmed her desire to serve Magnolia, questioning if it was truly all right for her to leave the mansion. With a confident smile, she vowed that she, the humble Lily, would protect the young lady in their place. Her vow, however, was immediately followed by a shout from behind. Brian came running towards them, his face a mask of determination, yelling for them to wait. He declared that wherever his sister went, he would follow and serve. He stood flustered in his sister's room as Magnolia, peeking over a large travel trunk, asked her big brother what was wrong. He demanded to know why their grandfather had come see her, but not him, complaining that lately their parents, and now even their grandfather, only seemed to talk about her. Magnolia, with a calm expression, simply replied that she wouldn't know even if he asked. His frustration finally boiled over, and with tears welling in his eyes, he shouted for her to just leave. His furious demand was met with unexpected compliance. Magnolia calmly agreed, which stunned Brian into silence. His anger evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed confusion as he demanded a proper explanation. The confused boy followed his sister down the grand staircase, where they were met by Marquis Selves. Brian's mood shifted instantly, his face lighting up as he happily greeted his grandfather. He looked at the small amount of luggage and asked if that was all. Magnolia, looking away, clarified that a man named Guy was responsible for carrying the dried meat. Brian seemed to understand the implication. With the practicalities settled, Magnolia turned to face her family gathered on the landing. She formally thanked her mother, Lady Wisteria, for the trouble of giving birth to her, and then turned to address the Marquis. Her gaze then shifted to the men standing together. Her other brother, Claude, her grandfather, and finally, she addressed her father, Lord Gerald. Her father, Lord Gerald, spoke with a calm expression, thanking her for everything she had done for them. He then turned his attention to a stunned Rosa, thanking the maid for putting up with all his selfishness. His words brought Rosa to tears as the other maids watched. Lord Gerald continued, telling the staff that he was never lonely because of them and asking them to stay well. He promised to ensure they wouldn't face hardship. Turning back to Magnolia, he wished her good health. Finally, he looked ahead and asked, "Shall we go then?" leaving Brian to stare in confusion. He shouted from the upper landing, demanding to know why Magnolia was leaving with their grandfather. Below, the maids Lily and Lila watched the departure with concern. Lily wondered aloud if Magnolia was simply going on an overnight trip, lamenting that she had wanted to talk with her more. The head maid, standing nearby, coolly stated that she would grill Magnolia upon her return. His outburst was met with a shocking revelation. As Magnolia stood at the base of the grand staircase with her grandfather and Countess Daphne, she offered her final thanks for everything. But Lily overheard the truth. The young lady would not be coming back. She had bought herself out, would become an orphan, and was moving to the frontier Margrave. The words echoed in Lily's mind, her face contorting in disbelief as she processed the impossible news. With the truth revealed, the heavy wheels of a carriage began to turn, carrying Magnolia and Brian away from the grand estate. Through the ornate window, the siblings looked out as their journey began. As the carriage rolled on, her mind drifted to the goodbyes, the smiling, waving faces of Rosa, Daisy, Lila, and all the other servants she was leaving behind. Her thoughts then shifted from the servants to those who were once her family. With a quiet finality, she bid them a silent goodbye from within the carriage as her grandfather sat opposite, his expression unreadable. She turned her gaze forward, looking out at the world ahead, and whispered one last, simple farewell. Her final farewell was not just to the people, but to the place itself. As the sprawling estate receded into the distance, she gave it a new name in her mind, her beautiful prison. Now, she was headed for the outside world. After leaving the mansion, a pair of ornate, horse-drawn carriages make their way through the city's cobblestone streets, carrying Lady Magnolia and her companions away from their home. Inside, Magnolia stares ahead with a grim and determined expression, her silence heavy with the weight of her recent decisions. The source of her discomfort is the carriage's cramped interior. Now dressed in a maid's uniform, she is wedged between her grandfather, Marquis Selves, and her brother, Lord Claude, both of whom look utterly exhausted. Despite his fatigue, the Marquis's stern facade breaks as he gazes at his granddaughter, his eyes crinkling with affection as he thinks to himself how incredibly cute she is. His murmurings seem to catch Magnolia's attention. Claude, however, addresses her directly, asking whose fault she thinks this situation is. He reveals their driver, Guy, has been working for 4 days straight and needs rest, which is why this carriage is not heading to Azinda. He continues, explaining that they will stay at a townhouse for the night, as neither he nor the Marquis have slept in 2 days. The small white creature beside Magnolia panics, thinking it's to blame. Guy then clarifies the situation. He had returned to the mansion to report that a noble lady was planning to run away. Hearing this, the Marquis's exhaustion vanishes, replaced by a fiery passion. He clenches his fist and declares that for Magnolia's sake, he would gladly skip rest for a week, or even an entire month. Claude then turns the questioning to Magnolia, asking how she planned to survive alone. She reveals her plan was to enter an orphanage, with the worst-case scenario being to flee abroad, though she internally concedes how difficult that would have been. He presses on, pointing out that a specific trait would make survival difficult, a color unique to the northern country. He clarifies that he means her hair color, a trait he believes their great-grandmother also possessed, much to Magnolia's visible annoyance. Her brother, Claude, continued his explanation, revealing that her lineage traces back to the royal family of a fallen northern country. He stressed that this connection made her valuable, suggesting that if she were an orphan, another nation would have quickly claimed her. Overwhelmed, she clutched her head and denied any lingering thoughts of running away to live on her own. In response to her denial, he presented her with a formal note declaring a debt. He made it clear she was not to run out on it, offering her a place at the estate until it was repaid, as no one had offered her free lodging. Flustered but determined, she promised to work hard to settle the account. Internally, Claude acknowledged that he didn't truly need the money, but knew her pride would compel her to repay him regardless. He mused that by the time the debt was settled, the whole affair would likely be something they could laugh about. His thoughts were interrupted when she suddenly peered out the window with wide eyes, urgently asking him to stop the carriage. The carriage halted before a large building, its sign identifying it as the Campbell Trading Company. As Claude registered their location, she, having pulled her hood up, announced she would be right back and quickly disembarked. Moments later, she returned to the carriage door, thanking them for waiting. She then presented Claude with a handful of coins, explaining that it was the 3 small silver pieces she had borrowed, with interest included. Her brother looked on, momentarily confused by the payment. Their grandfather, the Marquis, leaned forward and asked if she had earned the money just then. She confirmed it, explaining that she had sold the embroidery she'd been practicing at the mansion. She added that she had also commissioned a new outfit from Mr. Simon, arranging for it to be sent to the Marquis's territory, before presenting a small drawstring pouch as another gift. Claude, meanwhile, looked completely overwhelmed by her resourcefulness. The Marquis took the pouch, utterly astonished that Magnolia had sewn herself. He realized she must have felt that handkerchiefs alone were insufficient. As she examined her own work, she commented on the novel design, admitting it was merely a practice piece. The admission left Claude speechless. He finally spoke, asking if she was certain about this, wondering if she wasn't giving away her own precious pocket money. She simply beamed, assuring him it was fine and expressing her relief that her work had sold all. With a determined expression, she declared that she was repaying her debt. Though it was early, she presented her payment and stated that because of this, she no longer needed to live in the forest. Her final words caught both Claude and the Marquis by surprise, their expressions questioning the sudden mention of a forest. She looks up from the floor, still held by her brother Claude, who demands to know what she meant by forest. With a weary expression, she confirms it was intended as a hiding place. Before the tense conversation can continue, Marquis Sells intervenes. He addresses the maids, noting they must be tired and should get some rest before they arrive. A grateful Rosa thanks him, while the Marquis and Claude maintain their grim expressions. Later, as Magnolia sleeps, the adults discuss the gravity of the situation. Lord Gerald remarks that she is terrifyingly clever and has nerves of steel, realizing she genuinely planned to run away. The Marquis adds that her sharp, cat-like personality might be a trait inherited from his son, Gerald. Elsewhere, in a library filled with books, a young nobleman with long, light hair speaks with a cool, detached tone. He questions if the royal family is truly all they are perceived to be, remarking that the late king's passing was truly unfortunate. Meanwhile, Marquis Sells makes a decision. He informs Claude that he intends to focus on governing the domain for the time being. Turning his gaze to a young man in a formal uniform, he makes a solemn request to please take care of his daughter. His thoughts drift to the past as he confides in Claude. He reveals that a certain man never spoke of his reasons, leading the Marquis to believe he wasn't someone he could trust. Claude offers a different possibility, wondering aloud if the man had been threatened by someone. The weight of the conversation hangs in the air as the Marquis turns his attention back to his granddaughter. He watches her sleeping peacefully, her soft breaths undisturbed by the serious matters being discussed around her. His mind wanders back to the day Magnolia was born, questioning what truly transpired at that time. As if sensing his thoughts, her eyes suddenly fly open. She bolts upright in bed, gasping, her expression one of pure shock in the morning light. Her panic is immediately broken by a cheerful, booming voice. Marquis Selves stands by her bedside, a wide grin on his face as he wishes her a good morning. Still catching her breath, she dazedly realizes she has overslept. Now dressed and composed, she walks down the grand hallway, her small hand held securely by Rosa. The Marquis leads the way, but her focus shifts when she hears a faint, persistent cough echoing from somewhere nearby. Her gaze lifts, her brow furrowed in thought. She sits at the dining table with her family, noticing how quiet the estate has become. Her father, Lord Gerald, remarks on it as well. A servant explains that a cold is going around and several staff members are resting in their rooms. Magnolia asks what the cure for a cold is, to which her father replies that rest is the best remedy. Her small, ghostly companion explains that the standard treatment is to eat nourishing food, take medicine, and get plenty of rest. This confirms her own memories from her past life. There was no specific cure there either. With a nod, she understands what must be done. Following this realization, she abruptly asks for the location of the kitchen. Her brother, Claude, is visibly startled by her sudden intensity. Her father, however, simply points the way. She storms into the kitchen and seizes a large knife with a fierce look of determination, causing Claude to cry out for her to wait. But she has no intention of causing harm, instead issuing clear instructions. She tells them to prepare easily digestible food with plenty of vegetables like spinach, carrots, and pumpkin. For when the servants feel better, she adds, they should prepare fish formed into balls. Her knowledge is quickly put into practice. Lord Gerald relays her advice, explaining that yogurt mixed with honey is good for the throat due to its anti-inflammatory properties. He continues with her other directives. Open the windows regularly to ventilate, boil water in the rooms to increase humidity, and wash hands frequently. He then adds her instruction to gargle regularly, a concept that seems to confuse him. He questions its necessity, noting to himself that even overseas, the importance of such a practice wasn't recognized until much later in history. Sometime later, the head butler, Thomas, and the head maid stand before Magnolia, their faces covered by protective masks. With a hand placed respectfully over his heart, Thomas expresses their profound gratitude for sharing such precious and effective knowledge. He continues his praise with great emotion, declaring that Lady Magnolia will surely be a guiding light for the people and the kingdom. Internally, Magnolia feels he's going too far, thinking she must sound like a suspicious person. She insists it was nothing. As she departs in a carriage, she sees Thomas outside, enthusiastically directing the staff. She calls out a final reminder to boil and disinfect the used masks. She reflects on his unusual zeal, noting that most of the servants are getting older. She looks down, a small smile on her face, realizing the truth. He wasn't just being dutiful. He was genuinely happy that she, a member of the noble family, had shown such sincere care for their well-being. She listened as her father, Lord Gerald, beamed with pride. He declared that just by being there, she was already a light for their family, for the servants, and for him and Claude. Daisy, the maid, enthusiastically agreed, as did Claude. He continued, his hand gently resting on her head, explaining that even if she didn't become a light for the entire nation, she shouldn't hesitate to rely on them. Touched by his words, Magnolia looked up at him, her eyes wide with emotion. Her moment of warmth was interrupted as they stood by a carriage. Her father's tone shifted, becoming more inquisitive. He asked her to explain what she meant earlier by terms like immunity, lactic acid bacteria, and the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. A bead of sweat formed on Magnolia's temple as she struggled for an answer. From a distance, the headmaid, Thomas, and Daisy watched the exchange. The headmaid remarked that Lady Magnolia was truly a mysterious little lady, while Thomas praised her impressive knowledge and initiative. All three agreed on one thing. She was simply adorable. Unaware of their admiration, Lord Gerald's thoughts turned to heavier matters. He spoke of the countless problems that had plagued their territory since the war, musing that with Magnolia's brilliance, she could show remarkable talent far beyond their own domain. Claude listened, a subtle smile on his face. His words did not go unheard. Standing before him, Magnolia processed his heavy statement. A realization dawned on her. Things might get quite busy in many ways. After leaving the kingdom of Iskald, a carriage heads toward the Azinda Margrave. A map reveals their route through the massive northern forest, a path shared with the Holy Kingdom of Monteriona to the north and the Empire of Marinese to the south. This route, while the shortest, is chosen because the party is unaccustomed to long journeys. Suddenly, the journey is violently interrupted. A monstrous, giant ant attacks the convoy, and Lord Claude Allen Gilmore meets its charge head-on, his face a mask of grim determination as he strains against the creature's immense power. He shoves the creature back, his blade flashing as it slices through the monster's leg. Nearby, Thomas engages another of the beasts. From within the carriage, Magnolia recalls the decision to take this path, wondering why they would choose the dangerous northern forest, a known habitat for insect swarms, over a safer, albeit longer, route. Claude stands as a formidable guardian, seemingly in full control. Magnolia, however, knows it is not so simple. Her eyes widen with anxiety, sensing the true gravity of their situation despite the skill of their protectors. His movements are swift and precise, dispatching the giant ants with such ease that Magnolia almost feels sorry for them. He calls out, warning the girls not to stray from the carriage. While Magnolia watches the one-sided slaughter, Lily can only scream in terror as a defeated ant lies before them. Her terror is justified as another ant screeches, its dark form looming over her and the small, white creature. Both let out a piercing shriek of pure fear. Lily grabs Magnolia and pulls her away, running for safety. She laments her fate, wondering why reincarnation didn't grant her amazing powers, as she feels not even a hint of any special ability. Behind them, a creeple as small ant gives chase. Tears streaming down her face, she turns to Magnolia, brandishing a small knife. She vows to protect her milady, even if it costs her own life. This act of bravery infuriates Magnolia, who clenches her fists, frustrated that this danger has appeared just as she was finally released from house arrest. Her frustration boils over into a raw, unrestrained fury. Her face contorts, and a deep, guttural growl escapes her throat. She lunges forward, screaming a challenge at the monstrous insect. With a small knife clutched in her hand, she charges. The little white creature, inspired by her courage, follows suit with a tiny fork raised high. Lily cries out her name in alarm. Lady Magnolia. She reaches the giant ant and pokes its hard carapace with her tiny knife. The creature pauses, seemingly confused by the minuscule attack, letting out a questioning chirp. Her frustration boils over. She screams at the insect, berating it for trying to act cute and calling it a creepy little freak. She continues her furious rant, lamenting that after finally being freed from house arrest, this creature dared to get in her way and even threatened her precious maid, Lily. As she shouts, her guard Thomas panics, demanding to know what Claude will do if she's harmed. Claude, however, simply covers his face, muttering about the idiocy of the situation. In a flash of motion, Claude lunges forward, his blade slicing cleanly through the air. With a cry of "Idiot!" he dispatches the giant ant in a single swift strike. With the immediate threat gone, Lily rushes to Magnolia's side, asking if she is all right. Magnolia's attention, however, is captured by several glowing spheres left where the monster vanished. Thomas identifies them as nectar orbs, a sweet snack made by the ants, and speculates the creature offered them as a gift for her fierce defense of Lily. He can't help but chuckle, remarking that there's never a dull moment with his young lady. Claude, thoroughly unamused, sharply slaps Thomas on the head, demanding to know what's so funny. He reminds Thomas that he was entrusted with Magnolia's protection, but Thomas defends himself, stating that keeping her from feeling anxious is also part of his job. Ignoring the exchange, Claude turns his stern gaze on Magnolia, informing her that they will have a discussion back in the carriage. She can only agree quietly. Once inside the carriage, he begins his lecture, criticizing her unladylike speech and reminding her of their public-facing duties. He insists that she cannot simply panic in an emergency and deny responsibility, though her small companion silently seems to place the blame squarely on him. The conversation is interrupted when Thomas presents a gleaming crystal. He explains that when a monster disappeared, it left behind this shiny stone along with the nectar orbs. Magnolia immediately identifies it as a magic stone, remarking that it's like the core of the monster. She expresses her fascination, finding the concept very much like something from a fantasy story. Thomas elaborates, explaining that such stones are frequently used to power magical tools from Onteriona. However, Claude sternly brings the conversation back to his lecture, telling her not to change the subject or click her tongue in defiance. Their journey concludes as the carriages pull up to a grand, unfamiliar estate. Magnolia stares at the impressive building, her expression one of utter shock, while Claude, Thomas, and Lily stand beside her. She is met by an imposing, older man who introduces himself as Sebastian, the head butler. Magnolia feels an intense pressure from his presence, similar to what she felt from Thomas, but she collects herself and offers a formal greeting, introducing herself as the first daughter of the Gilmore Marquis. With a bow, Sebastian formally welcomes them all to the Azinda Frontier Margrave. As Magnolia and her small companion take in the name of the estate, the other servants bow their heads in respect. Claude steps forward, informing Sebastian that he has already prioritized the necessary tasks during the butler's absence. He then turns his attention to Magnolia, suggesting that if she isn't tired, she should come to his office later, as there is someone he wants her to meet. Her thoughts are interrupted by the booming voice of her grandfather, Marquis Selves, who is overjoyed at the prospect of spending time with her. To Magnolia's immense relief, a nearby maid clarifies that the master has mountains of work to attend to. Nearby, a flustered Lily is approached by an older woman who introduces herself as Blum, the head maid. Blum thanks Lily for her help, and Lily nervously introduces herself in return. Blum then states she will show the young maid to the servants' quarters later. As Blum leads them inside, Magnolia observes the mansion's interior. She finds it beautiful, but surprisingly modest for the home of a national hero, causing her to wonder if perhaps the royal palace was destroyed in the war. The group arrives at a well-appointed room. Blum announces that this will be Lady Magnolia's room from now on. The relatively humble scale of the accommodations puts Magnolia at ease, helping to calm her nerves. Blum explains that the room once belonged to the late Madame Azalea, and mentions that another relative, Lady Lunaria, passed away 10 years ago. Looking at a portrait, Blum remarks that the woman depicted was greatly looking forward to Magnolia's birth. Magnolia finds this news somber. When Blum offers to change the furniture, Magnolia's creature speaks up, saying it's fine, which startles the head maid. After processing the information, Magnolia instructs Lily to put her clothes away. With sudden resolve, she announces that she needs to head to the office, leaving her small companion momentarily stunned. Meanwhile, in that very office, Claude stands before Brian. He knocks sharply on the desk, stating that there is something he needs to talk about. A young boy stands nervously in the room as Claude acknowledges his arrival. Nearby, Marquis Selves asks his granddaughter Magnolia if she is tired, but she assures him she is fine. The Marquis then formally presents the boy, Dean Palmore, as her new playmate and attendant. The boy, Dean, puffs out his chest and delivers a well-rehearsed introduction with a bright smile. He announces that it is a pleasure to meet them, identifying himself as Dean Palmore, third son of the Baron of Palmore and grandson of the head maid Blum. He concludes by stating he is 6 years old. Watching him, Magnolia internally remarks on how mature he seems for his age, suspecting he must have practiced that formal greeting extensively. In response to his formal greeting, Magnolia introduces herself as Magnolia Gilmore. Claude, looking unimpressed, turns to his father and asks if he was summoned merely to witness this introduction. The Marquis explains to his son that he thought it best for everyone to meet sooner rather than later. He then turns his attention back to Magnolia, stating that if she has a moment, there are matters he wishes to discuss. Claude addresses the young attendant directly, telling Dean he is free to leave. He then adds with a wry tone that it might be good training for him to stay, as he will be dragged around by Magnolia from now on. Dean's face pales in shock at the blunt warning, as the Marquis simply agrees. Regaining control of the conversation, the Marquis begins by telling Magnolia he will keep the furniture as it is. She readily agrees, stating she is used to its size. Claude observes this, privately thinking she is unaware of her own destructive tendencies. Magnolia continues with her own agenda, first proposing she call the 19-year-old Claude Big Brother instead of Uncle. She then asks the Marquis about his marriage plans and how a child in the house might affect his fiancée, before finally stating her desire to discuss her own future. The Marquis is visibly flustered by the barrage of mature topics. As the Marquis reels, Claude turns to the still nervous Dean and asks for his opinion on his new master. Before the boy can answer, Magnolia looks toward him with wide, hopeful eyes, asking if he thinks he can handle the job. At the Selves estate, young Magnolia approaches the steward, Sebastian, who is identified as the older brother of Thomas. She inquires about the library, asking if it is possible for her to use it. Kneeling to her level, Sebastian confirms that it is and advises her to ask Blum, who can guide her there immediately. He adds, however, that he believes there are no picture books available at the moment, but promises to arrange for some to be brought in soon. Magnolia expresses her gratitude. As they converse, Sebastian suggests a story for her, The Sage of the Forest and the Fairy, mentioning that the Gilmore family has connections to fairies. He elaborates that the founder of Azinda was a human king with elven blood. This information prompts Magnolia to wonder aloud if elves and humans can truly marry. She becomes flustered by the thought, exclaiming that due to the vast differences in lifespan, a 47-year-old human would seem like a mere baby to an elf. After a slight cough to regain composure, Sebastian calmly clarifies that children born from such unions are known as half-elves. This revelation leads her to conclude that marriage with fairies or even gods must be possible. She then recalls a key piece of family history. Her great-grandmother was from the fairy kingdom of Haltia. Sebastian confirms this is correct, prompting Magnolia to admit she learned this from reading extensively at the other mansion. Inspired, she decides she wants to write a letter and asks to borrow writing tools. She explains her intention to write to Lady Daphne from the royal capital, a woman who helped her at the Gilmore estate, though she only knows her by her first name. Sebastian readily agrees, promising to have the supplies delivered to her room shortly. Magnolia beams with gratitude. Sebastian offers to write the address on her behalf and asks if she knows the lady's family name, revealing it to be Countess Lepoir. The information confuses Magnolia, who asks why she's called Countess Daphne instead of by her family name. He explains that in Ascald, there's a tradition of naming girls after flowers, a blessing from the goddess of flowers. When a woman's achievements are recognized, she may be granted a title attached to her given name. Magnolia is surprised, having assumed the culture was strictly patriarchal. Sebastian confirms her new understanding and prepares to take his leave. Before departing completely, he turns with a small smile and requests that she simply call him Sebastian from now on. The gesture leaves Magnolia momentarily stunned. She finds his cool, intelligent demeanor impressive, noting that the pressure he exudes is comparable to that of her own grandfather. Deciding she has lingered long enough, she turns to head back to her room. Her path is suddenly blocked by Guy, the apprentice gardener, who leaps out and startles her. He laughs, declaring that he scared the life out of her. He cheerfully adds that since she always surprises him, they are now even. Recovering from the shock, Magnolia observes with a weary expression that he hasn't changed at all. She looks up at the gardener's apprentice, Guy, and asks if he is going somewhere. He confirms, explaining that he was originally tasked with gathering intelligence from nearby countries, but is now here to hand that job over to someone else. With a worried expression, she asks if he'll be back soon. He smiles, estimating it might take about a month, a length of time that surprises her. Thanking her for the concern, he tells her to take care and avoid getting hurt while he is away. As he turns to depart, he offers one last piece of advice, urging his lady not to overdo things and to stay well. Her small, white companion watches him go. With a sudden burst of movement, he leaps from a high window, disappearing into the trees outside. Alone in the vast room, Magnolia takes a deep breath, quietly wondering what sort of trouble she might find herself in over the next month. Bounding through the forest, Guy recalls Magnolia's bizarre vocal exercises, phrases like floating seaweed, and the water strider is red, and bursts into laughter. Convinced something hilarious will happen in his absence, he resolves to finish his work and return quickly. Elsewhere, Countess Daphne appears, looking somewhat flustered. Countess Daphne enters the room with a young boy in tow, announcing that Sebastian informed her of the request and that she has brought writing supplies. She finds Magnolia mid-exercise, loudly practicing a tongue twister. The Countess approaches completely baffled and asks what on earth her ladyship is doing. Magnolia calmly replies that it is voice training. Exasperated, Daphne laments her own failure to correct the girl's slurred speech, though she reminds herself that Magnolia is only 4 years old. Internally, Magnolia seethes with frustration. Her adult soul cannot stand the baby talk any longer. Composing herself, she politely thanks the Countess and requests the supplies be placed on the table. Daphne then introduces the boy as her grandson, Dean, who will now assist Magnolia with her daily needs. Dean bows his head, expressing that he looks forward to working with her. When his grandmother asks if he isn't going to greet her, Magnolia smiles sweetly, stating that he already gave her a very enthusiastic greeting. As she speaks, she presses her foot firmly onto the boy's head, causing him to shiver. His eyes widen in shock as Magnolia picks up a fountain pen. Countess Daphne gasps, asking if it's true that her ladyship can already write. Dean, utterly stunned, can only stare as his grandmother exclaims how amazing it is. Magnolia laughs brightly, calling out to Dean. She tells him that if he tries to be so excessively polite, he'll just wear himself out, though she admits his dedication is truly amazing. She then leans in conspiratorially, suggesting they speak that way only when it's just the two of them. A flustered Dean reminds her that she must maintain proper boundaries, pointing out that even though he's small, he is 2 years older than her. He stammers his agreement, completely taken aback. Her small, bear-like companion then offers to summon Lady Lily for her, But Magnolia quickly refuses, explaining that Lily must be tired from the long trip and should be allowed to rest for the day. His heart thumps as he processes her considerate words. He intuits that she wants to give the maid time to get her personal things in order and even take a few days off if needed. He confirms he understands and will let Lady Lily know. Later, Magnolia sits at her desk, quill in hand, preparing to write a letter. She reasons that if she follows the etiquette she remembers from her previous life, starting with a seasonal greeting, the letter shouldn't come across as rude. As she works, her attention drifts to a portrait on her desk. It shows her great-grandmother, a princess from a former small country who was known as the Fairy Princess, and looked remarkably like Magnolia. She gazes at the image, wondering what kind of person her ancestor truly was. Her thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Sebastian, the head butler, who announces that dinner is ready. Having finished her task, Magnolia calmly acknowledges him. She hands the sealed letter to Sebastian, asking him to take care of it. He accepts it with a simple certainly. Nearby, her small companion breathes a sigh of relief that the task was completed so smoothly. At the dinner table, Sebastian presents the letter to Lord Claude. As Claude takes the envelope, Magnolia watches him with a worried expression, while her companion is so startled it tumbles from its chair. He reacts instantly, shoving his chair back from the dinner table with a sharp scrape. His eyes are wide with shock as he stares down at the letter, while Magnolia looks up at him, startled by the sudden commotion. Marquis Selves observes the scene with a quiet, knowing smile. Watching his grandson's sour expression, the Marquis remarks on it. Magnolia, meanwhile, flushes with embarrassment, thinking to herself how much of a worrywart Claude has become. Her grandfather, however, misinterprets her advanced vocabulary as a sign of high intelligence, commenting that she must be very smart and prone to overthinking things, a matter he had discussed in his office. He continues, reassuring Magnolia that she need not concern herself with her position or status. He tells her there is no need to force herself to attend public events or tea parties if she doesn't wish to. The Marquis firmly states his belief that, no matter how mature a child may seem, they should live with their family unless there is a special reason otherwise, promising that Gerald will handle any tedious matters that arise. In response to his praise, Magnolia looks down with a shadowed expression. She quietly thanks him, but confesses that she isn't truly that smart, explaining that her knowledge is merely an assembly of bits and pieces gathered from books, lessons, and secondhand information. Her internal thoughts reveal the truth. She is simply pulling out whatever memories her previous self possessed. An image of her current, small form flashes in her mind, lying amidst a sea of documents and data from her past life. Later, Sebastian, the head butler, examines a letter with a perplexed expression. He reads the title, The Truth About Me, and wonders aloud what it could be, addressing the unseen milady. The next morning, Sebastian enters Magnolia's chambers, apologizing for disturbing her rest. He informs the sleepy girl that Lord Selves requests her presence in his office and that he will escort her there. After she agrees, he looks at her with concern and asks if she is all right. As she walks toward the grand office doors, Magnolia wonders what her grandfather could possibly want to discuss. Announcing her arrival, she pushes the heavy door open. Inside, Marquis Selves stands with his arms crossed, offering a warm smile as he apologizes for summoning her so early. Lord Claude stands silently beside him. Magnolia, looking small in the large room, assures her grandfather that it is all right. The Marquis's expression turns serious as he explains his reason for calling her. They wanted to ask about the letter sent to Lady Daphne. He asked directly if she is certain she wrote it herself, questioning if someone helped revise it. Magnolia confirms it was her work alone, asking if something is wrong, while Claude watches her intently, his expression deeply troubled. Faced with their questions, she remains silent as her grandfather, Marquis Selves, holds up the letter in question. He reads its contents aloud, a formal and eloquent message addressed to Countess Daphne. The letter apologizes for sudden departure, expresses deep gratitude for the Countess's teachings in etiquette and wisdom, and wishes her continued health and happiness. It is signed simply Magnolia. Her brother, Lord Claude, reacts with disbelief. He points out that her writing is far too perfect, questioning how a 4-year-old could have possibly written such a sophisticated letter without any assistance. He insists that her ability goes far beyond merely knowing how to read and write. Leaning closer, his suspicion culminates in a direct and piercing question that hangs heavy in the air. Just who are you? The Marquis then adds his own thoughts, admitting that even he couldn't bring himself to write so poorly on purpose. He reflects that while his gratitude for the Countess was genuine, he likely would have made the mistake of writing in a manner too mature for a child, just as she has done. Listening to their deductions, Magnolia internally concedes that she was never good at keeping secrets. She decides that the time has finally come to be honest. As Lord Claude calls her name, sensing the shift in her demeanor, her resolve hardens. She turns to face them, her expression serious and determined. Grandfather, big brother, she begins, her voice steady. There's something I need to tell both of you. It was clear a long-held secret was about to be revealed. Magnolia recalls the events of the past 5 months. Believing her family was avoiding her due to her brother's behavior, she resolved to change their perception. To overcome the situation, she began secretly observing Lady Daphne's lessons to learn letters and numbers, while also learning manners and common sense from maids. Later, she discovered academy textbooks in the library and dedicated herself to absorbing the minimum knowledge required of a noble. In the present, her grandfather, Marquis Selves, listens to her account, his expression serious. He questions if she truly learned the entire content of the Royal Academy's textbooks. Beside him, her brother Claude murmurs in disbelief, processing the 5-month timeline she described. He considers her words, recalling reports from several servants who noted that the young lady had become much more cheerful, almost like a different person. Still, he finds it difficult to accept. He reasons that it would be impossible for a 3-year-old to absorb 6 years' worth of advanced material in just 5 months, unless she already possessed a strong foundation. Sensing his skepticism, she presses forward, acknowledging that what she is about to say will be hard to believe. She then poses a critical question. What if it were possible, because she already had that knowledge? The Marquis is struck speechless, his eyes wide, while Claude looks on in stunned silence. At last, with a steady and serious gaze, Magnolia reveals the truth of her situation. She declares that she possesses memories of a previous life. She begins to explain, stating that she originally lived in a different world, a planet called Earth, in a country named Japan. One night, she went to sleep and simply woke up as Magnolia Gilmore, the young daughter of the Marquis of Escald. In that previous life, she had a full education totaling 16 years. She continues, clarifying that the writing system was very similar to those used in foreign countries in this world. Because of this, subjects like arithmetic and natural sciences only required her to learn the differences in terminology. As she speaks, the Marquis listens with a grim intensity, his arms crossed. Claude, however, seems completely overwhelmed, burying his face in his hand. Her other brother, Brian, processes the information logically. He concludes that if she was already an adult before becoming Magnolia, then her rapid short-term learning is indeed plausible. Magnolia confirms that his understanding is correct. The Marquis, trying to grasp the implications, asks if this means she is older than Claude. A blush creeps across Magnolia's face as Claude stares in shock. The old man's face then contorts with dawning horror as he asks if she could possibly be older than him. Flustered, Magnolia emphatically denies it. He lets out a great sigh of relief, remarking that the shock was something akin to what he's experienced in war. Claude then offers a different perspective. He wonders if her condition is the result of psychological trauma, recalling that in her world, conditions like dissociative identity disorder were seen in people who had suffered abuse. The Marquis listens, hand to his chin, considering this alternative explanation. He observes his granddaughter, noting her complete understanding of the situation and her unnerving calm. She had even anticipated Claude's line of questioning and possessed solid knowledge to back her claims. Based on his intuition alone, he could not sense any deception in her words. She began to speak, acknowledging that this situation might have arisen because her family had neglected her, but she insisted it was not as simple as having a different personality. She explained that as far as she was aware, she had always been Magnolia Gilmore. However, when she truly awoke 5 months ago, the memories of another world were simply present within her. Her incredible story left both Claude and her grandfather to process the unbelievable claim in silence, their expressions grim and deeply troubled. The Marquis finally spoke, comparing her account to the fictional settings of plays or fantasy tales. Brian, however, interjected with a thought, suggesting that such a phenomenon might be related to ancient magics. He wondered aloud if this could be something like reincarnation. His brother seized upon the idea, his hand covering his mouth as he considered the possibilities. He murmured the word reincarnation, then posited that possession might be a more accurate term. She clarified her own thinking on the matter. If her original body had died while she slept and she was born again, that would be reincarnation. But if she had taken over an existing body, it would be possession. Unfortunately, she admitted, she could not be sure which it was, as her only memory was of falling asleep. She explained that she possessed 4 years of memories as Magnolia, alongside over 30 years of memories as a Japanese woman. The thought that the granddaughter they knew might have been replaced by a different person was a horror she herself did not want to contemplate. Claude rose abruptly, asking to be excused. Seeing his distress, Magnolia offered to leave for a convent or orphanage if they found her presence unbearable. He quickly apologized, admitting he was also confused and needed time. He remarked on her surprising composure, and she explained it was because she had an adult's memories, which helped her keep her emotions in check. The door swung open before he could touch it, revealing Lord Gerald standing in the hallway. The Marquis gasped, realizing with shock that his son, Magnolia's father, had been listening to the entire unbelievable conversation. The scene shifts to another part of the residence where Claude Allen Gilmore quietly murmurs Magnolia's name. Elsewhere, Rosa and young Dean Palmore greet Magnolia upon her return. Dean notes that he hasn't finished his studies yet, but explains he came to check on her because she seemed troubled. When Magnolia mentions she is heading to the library to study, she extends an invitation for him to join her. He clenches his small fist, his expression filled with sudden resolve. Dean declares that he will study harder, vowing that once he can read properly, he will accompany her. Watching him, Rosa is touched by his earnestness, remarking on what a hard worker he is. As Magnolia turns to head towards the library, Dean quickly asks if she could show him the way there. She looks back with a warm smile and readily agrees, much to the surprise of flustered Rosa. In the quiet of the library, Lady Magnolia pores over her books. A maid with dark, chin-length hair peeks in through the doorway, noticing the chill in the air. She remarks that it's been getting colder and offers to fetch a warm drink, to which Magnolia gives a simple thanks. As the maid departs, a cold draft sweeps through the room. Once alone, she unfurls a large map across the desk. The rustle of the paper is the only sound in the vast room. She resolves internally that she must once again search for an escape route. Her mind races through the possibilities. The north is impossible due to the presence of magic bugs. As a worst-case scenario, she considers heading west to sneak onto a ship. For now, she finds that simply having something to focus on is a welcome distraction. She glares at the open book before her, a profound sense of displacement washing over her. Somehow, she has ended up somewhere incredibly far from everything she once knew. The thought triggers a spiral of existential dread. She can no longer remember her job, nor the faces of her family from her past life. She wonders which version of me is the real one, and if the person she was in Japan will ever reawaken. As she sits lost in these troubling thoughts, the library door creaks open. Her brother, Claude, steps inside and sees her forlorn expression. He asks what's wrong, thinking to himself that he cannot simply ignore a child who looks so utterly dejected. He recalls her confession that she possesses the memories of an adult. He begins to truly consider her plight, being thrown into a completely different era, country, and society. He imagines the immense fear and anxiety she must have endured. Believing she knows how to manage her own feelings, he decides to leave the matter to her discretion. His resolve shatters the moment he looks closer. Her face is stained with tears, her large eyes shimmering with unshed sorrow. His own eyes widen in shock and alarm. Reacting instantly, he lunges forward, pulling her into a crushing, desperate hug. He panics, demanding to know why she is crying, his own breath catching in his throat. Muffled by the embrace, she tries to insist that she is okay. Just as suddenly, he releases her, sputtering. He looks away, flustered, and asks if she finds him disgusting. She stares back, utterly bewildered by the question, and quietly denies it. His confusion only deepens as he whirls back to her, demanding, why? He explains that he only recently learned of her situation, but it doesn't matter to him whether she has the mind of an adult or a child. He reassures her that to him, she is simply Magnolia. With tears streaming down her face, she listens as he asks where else she could possibly go. His words finally break through her composure, and she lets out a loud, unrestrained wail. A small, gentle smile touches Claude's lips as he holds a handkerchief at the ready. He then gently dabs at her tear-streaked face, remarking that she is making quite an awful expression. The quiet moment is shattered by a tremendous bang as the door is thrown open. Marquis Selves, Magnolia's grandfather, bursts into the room, roaring her name. The Marquis immediately sweeps Magnolia into a crushing hug, crying out an apology. Startled, she recognizes her grandfather as he declares she is his precious granddaughter. Her father, Lord Gerald, appears in the doorway, pleading with the Marquis to be gentle, just as Rosa arrives with tea. Amidst the commotion, her tears of sorrow transform into a radiant smile. She realizes that this is how it should be. She should always be smiling. Sometime later, a cheerful Magnolia calls out from high up in a tree. Below, a panicked Dean Palmore begs her to come down, worried they will be scolded by Claude, her grandfather, or the head maid if they're discovered. Her fun is cut short when her foot slips. Before she can fall, Claude, who is already in the tree above her, effortlessly catches her. Holding her securely, he reminds her of her claim that her mind is older than his. He continues to tease her with a knowing smirk, asking if middle-aged women from her world are prone to climbing trees. She looks away, retorting that right now, she is simply an adorable little girl. She muses that a person's existence is always in flux, and life and death are but a breath away. She contemplates the nature of her new existence, questioning if it is genuine or merely an imitation, reality or illusion. The boundary feels vague and hard to grasp. She sees images of her boisterous grandfather wanting to play, a strange man in a jester's cap, and a composed young man in uniform. Yet, grounding her is Claude's presence, his gentle voice, his strong gaze, the steady beat of his heart, and his soft breaths. Her internal debate settles into a quiet certainty. With a soft, knowing smile, she accepts her truth. Yes, without a doubt, she is now Magnolia. She is right here, now dressed in a large bear costume. She holds Claude's hand and walks forward with him, leaving the manor behind. As Dean and Rosa watch them depart, it is clear that this moment marks a true new beginning. In the training grounds, Lady Magnolia throws herself into practice with a group of men. With a determined shout, she swings her practice weapon, her face contorted with effort. The men around her brace themselves, their expressions a mixture of strain and shock at her unexpected ferocity. She lets out a fierce battle cry, her eyes squeezed shut in a glare of pure concentration as she puts all her might into a single, powerful swing. The force of her blow sends the men stumbling back in disbelief. Magnolia herself looks stunned by the result, realizing with a gasp that this level of power should be impossible for her. From a short distance, Lord Claude watches her display. He calmly suggests that next time, she should perhaps contain such movements to within the estate's walls. Magnolia turns away, her cheeks puffed out in frustration, muttering that she had only done as she was told and tried to act normal. He approaches, asking why she suddenly decided to join the morning practice, stating that he doesn't believe she needs such training. With her small creature companion perched on her head, Magnolia retorts that preparing for emergencies is important. The creature silently observes, thinking to itself that she seems exactly like the type of person who would charge headfirst into danger alone. His expression remains skeptical, as if sensing another reason for her actions. His attention then shifts to a young boy, Dean, being instructed by a trainer to tuck his arms in properly during his sword practice. The boy responds with a dutiful, "Yes, sir." Magnolia walks over to the boy and asks if he's having fun. Dean's face lights up as he confirms that he is. She then asks if he wants to become a knight, causing his cheerful expression to vanish. He quietly admits that he did, but since all his older brothers are already aiming to be knights, he was the one told he couldn't. He explains that from his family's perspective, it's too risky for all the heirs to become knights. When Magnolia asks if he hates studying, Dean clarifies that it's not his choice. Everyone simply tells him he can't pursue his dream. Seeing his distress, Magnolia gently pats his head, advising him to focus on his studies and help out for now. She continues, questioning if knights don't also need to study, and tells him that if he truly wants it, he should prepare for it. Claude nods in silent agreement. Magnolia then adopts a sterner tone, pointing at Dean. She explains that while personal preferences and one's job are separate things, it is fundamentally wrong not to perform one's duties properly. Her words strike a chord. Dean's eyes widen, and with newfound resolve, he clenches his fists and shouts, "I can do it." A moment later, he looks back, his expression one of startled realization. His renewed determination is met with an unexpected gesture. With a bright smile, Magnolia offers to lend him a wooden tablet. Dean hesitates, recognizing it as something very important to her, but she insists, declaring, "Then here, I'll lend you this." He accepts, flustered but resolute. Magnolia explains she is lending it specially to him, her friend, and asks him to use it carefully and return it once he's memorized it. The word friend strikes Dean with the force of a revelation, and clutching the tablet, he promises to go study immediately. As Dean rushes off, Claude approaches Magnolia, who is now sitting on the ground, and asks if this was her goal. She denies it, explaining that she genuinely wanted to train and not let what Lila taught her go to waste. Claude observes her quietly. He continues, mentioning that Blum had noted Dean's lack of focus, while Lily had seen him hiding in the library. Claude surmises Dean was trying, but lacked conviction. Magnolia clarifies her own motives. She wanted to learn about the country's core industries, economic sectors, and population distribution, but found the raw materials confusing, which is why she was studying related books and maps. A brief image of her grandfather, Marquis Selves, commanding his men flashes through the scene. The Marquis himself is interrupted by a messenger arriving on a fast horse. After breakfast, the purpose of the urgent message becomes clear as the Marquis throws a tantrum on the floor of the mansion, wailing that he doesn't want to go. His attendants note that a summons from the capital via fast horse must be urgent, as they normally only arrive every 2 months. He rationalizes his reluctance with a grumble, thinking to himself that since this is the frontier and the capital is far away, there is no real need to hurry. Patting a weary Magnolia on the head, the Marquis loudly proclaims he won't leave until he's spent a whole day playing with his granddaughter, insisting he will stay at least until noon. His defiant expression, however, quickly begins to waver. In response, Magnolia looks up at him with wide, innocent eyes. She tells him that a grandfather who works hard and can be relied on is incredibly cool, and sweetly asks him to finish his work quickly so he can come home soon. Her words, a gentle push for him to just go already, strike him with surprising force. Her encouragement works instantly. The Marquis leaps onto his horse, declaring he'll finish everything at full speed and return. He gallops away so fast that his attendants cry out for him not to leave the carriage behind. In the aftermath, Magnolia tells Claude she feels a bit queasy, but is okay. Claude notes that she has now seen most of the mansion's non-combatants. He then makes a surprising suggestion. "Then how about we go into town for once?" Magnolia looks up, startled, as he clarifies that he's indeed taking her out. He tells her he will call for her before noon, giving her the option to decline if she cannot go. She rushes out to meet her brother, apologizing for the delay. Claude, waiting patiently with a horse, advises her to wear something easy to move in since they will be riding. Magnolia cheerfully agrees. He then looks over her elaborate dress, questioning if it's suitable and noting that her shoes might also be an issue. When she admits she doesn't own any proper riding clothes, Claude smiles gently and offers his own coat for her to wear over herself. Riding swiftly through the countryside, Lord Claude explains the landscape to his sister, Magnolia. He points out the vast wheat fields near the domain capital and mentions the various gardens they will see. Magnolia, seated securely in front of him, is filled with wonder, her attention momentarily captured by a squirrel darting into the woods. Her face beams with pure, unadulterated joy, her eyes wide with excitement for the adventure ahead. Their journey brings them into a bustling city market, the streets filled with townspeople going about their day. After dismounting, Claude suggests they explore the food stalls. Magnolia is immediately captivated by the sights and smells of regional delicacies. Grilled meat skewers from Escalde, fried seafood reminiscent of Manhwa, and flatbread from Monteriona. She enthusiastically agrees. Soon, they're seated on a bench surrounded by a veritable feast. Overwhelmed by her desire to try everything, Magnolia realizes she has accumulated far too much food. Claude, amused, reassures her that she doesn't need to force herself to finish it all, offering to eat whatever she leaves. Her spirits lift instantly. She happily devours a pastry. Watching her, Claude reflects on her dual nature, sometimes a child, sometimes an adult, and feels a quiet satisfaction, glad he decided to bring her with him. As they continue their walk, Claude asks if she can still eat, while her small companion pats its stuffed belly. He notes they are passing near the slums and points out some fruit stalls. A cheerful vendor calls out, highly recommending a particular fruit he is selling. The vendor, recognizing them as foreigners, asks where they are from. Claude replies that they hail from Ignis. His interest is piqued by the unique local seasonings, and he hopes to find something similar to miso before deciding to purchase one of the fruits. He notices Magnolia's thoughtful expression and asks if something is on her mind, but she dismisses it. Later, by the sea, Claude carries a tired Magnolia. As a large seabird swoops past, he remarks that the air is getting colder and they should head back for dinner. Magnolia's small companion observes that the bird is quite vocal. Their return to the town square is met with a commotion. A crowd has gathered, murmuring about a fight. As Claude steps forward to investigate, Magnolia's eyes widen in shock. She spots her other brother, Brian, in the center of the crowd and cries out his name. She watched, startled, as the scene unfolded. The situation was far worse than she imagined. A large man with a blade struggled against Claude's grip, growling with rage. Claude urged Brian to leave him behind, insisting the knights would arrive shortly, but Brian refused to abandon him. Magnolia's eyes widened in fear. This was incredibly dangerous. He wasted no time. With a furious cry, Claude swung his leg around and delivered a powerful kick directly to the assailant's face. The impact sent the man stumbling backward as a nearby attendant cried out in shock, claiming the force of the blow was so great his vision was blacking out. The chaos of the moment seemed to trigger a memory of another sensory assault from earlier that day at the market. Claude had been utterly repulsed by the smell of a large, spiky fruit, wondering aloud how it could possibly be food. He mused that its pungent aroma might even surpass that of the durians he knew from Earth. Others nearby shared his disgust, though a pair of men debated buying one, having heard they tasted good despite the smell. Once the situation was resolved and they were on their way back, Magnolia turned to him with a bright smile. She thanked him for the outing, explaining that there are many things one can only learn firsthand, not from books or stories. Grateful that he took time from his busy schedule for her, she cheerfully asked if they could go out again. Claude looked down at her, a gentle expression on his face, and agreed. Her enthusiasm immediately found a new target. With wide, sparkling eyes, she announced her desire to visit the church. The sudden declaration caught an older attendant by surprise, who questioned her reason. Undeterred, Magnolia clenched her fists, her mind already set on what she considered the next stage of her plan. A footfall echoes on the stone path as people pass under a large archway, entering a district of the city. Having witnessed the reality of the slums, Magnolia, accompanied by Claude, observes the destitute residents. She correctly surmises that the war is the cause of their plight, and Claude confirms her suspicion. He elaborates that many who lost their families or were injured and unable to work began settling in the back alleys. While shelters exist, some individuals don't fit in and inevitably return to the streets. A nearby knight on patrol clarifies the situation further. He states that because the knights directly patrol this area, there aren't many major crimes, but it remains one of their ongoing issues. The knight adds that the church periodically provides meals and the guilds help with job placements. Taking this all in, Magnolia looks troubled. The scene shifts to Sebastian, who addresses her directly, confirming her desire. You want to go to the church. In response, Magnolia's expression shifts dramatically. She beams with a wide, innocent smile and asks why he is so surprised, reminding him that she has not yet paid her respects to her grandmother. Her sudden, beaming innocence immediately raises Sebastian's suspicions. He recalls her earlier request to visit the Marquis family's grave to take a look around. From a nearby doorway, Magnolia and Claude peek out, watching his reaction. Meanwhile, Claude recovers from their recent excursion, panting with exhaustion. He reminds himself that he cannot let his guard down, especially since she had just returned covered in sand the day before. Back in the hallway, Sebastian presents his counteroffer with a pleasant smile. He suggests that instead of going now, she should wait and go with Lord Sells upon his return, assuring her that her grandfather would be delighted. He believes he has won. Internally, Sebastian erupts with triumphant shouts, celebrating his successful negotiation. Magnolia watches him, thinking that while he's being selfish, she understands it's because he worries about her wanting to go outside. A nearby maid simply pities her young lady. As the carriage prepares to depart, young Dean Palmore rushes out, his face etched with worry. The head butler, Sebastian, calls out to him, asking if he is concerned. He bursts into the carriage, confronting Lady Magnolia with a desperate plea. He questions why she can't simply go with someone from his own household, his voice filled with anxiety for her safety. She looks at him with wide, innocent eyes, asking if her plan is still not acceptable. Inside the moving carriage, her knight escort questions her intentions, asking if she is truly only attending the service. Magnolia cheerfully lists her additional errands, observing the meal distribution for her own learning, buying fabric for sewing, and taking a look at the rural areas to better understand the territory. Her maid giggles at the extensive itinerary. The knight remains unconvinced, certain she has ulterior motives. As their carriage approaches a grand church, Magnolia peers out the window, a flicker of concern on her face as she quietly hopes that no strange noble ladies will bother her. Her premonition proves true. Inside a room, she and her maid are accosted by an imperious young woman. The stranger dramatically demands to know who they are and where Lord Claude is, then fixes Magnolia with an intense stare, questioning if she is an acquaintance of his. The noblewoman scoffs, looking down on Magnolia's plain, hand-me-down clothes and unfamiliar hair color. She expresses outrage that a mere servant would dare ride in the master's carriage and address Lord Claude so informally, lamenting the perceived slight to him. In response to the insults, Magnolia's demeanor shifts entirely. She levels a chilling glare at the woman and issues a sharp correction, reminding her of proper etiquette. One must listen and only speak after a person of higher status grants permission. With a serene, almost unnerving smile, Magnolia introduces herself properly. She declares that the woman is standing before the highest-ranking unmarried woman in all of the Skald, the granddaughter of the demon general, the young lady of the Gilmore Marquis family. As her companions reel in shock, she delivers the final blow, announcing that she is Lord Claude's fiancée. With a polite farewell, she turns to leave, leaving the entire room stunned. The aftermath of her declaration is chaos. Both the knight and Dean tremble, with Dean protesting that her claim isn't true and that she is overreacting. Magnolia, meanwhile, seems lost in thought, wondering aloud if this dramatic type is what her brother truly likes. The maid clarifies the situation for the bewildered knight. She explains that the noblewoman was once considered a candidate for Lord Claude's fiancée, but the arrangement fell through. Ever since, she has been proclaiming herself as such and causing trouble wherever Lord Claude might be. The knight clutches his head, overwhelmed by the complicated social minefield. Inside a grand, sunlit church, people gather and murmur amongst themselves. Claude's attendant, a maid with curly hair and glasses, sighs to herself, lamenting that being too good-looking comes with its own set of troubles. The small, bear-like creature at her side seems to agree wholeheartedly. As the congregation prays, it is noted that the dominant religion in this world is known as Orthodoxy. On this continent, most countries are deeply tied to their origins, and in a Skald, the people worship the supreme goddess of flowers within the Orthodoxy faith. Among the worshippers are Magnolia and her brother, Claude. He announces his intention to greet the bishop, while Magnolia feels a strange, unsettling sensation, wondering if it stems from her unfamiliarity with churches. The restless feeling in her heart persists as they leave the building. She recalls that a meal distribution is scheduled next and deduces that such events are typically held near the back entrance to avoid disturbing traffic. Hearing this, Claude's attendant realizes she must prepare and quickly dashes away with Claude and the creature in tow. With a sharp clap, she presses her hands to her cheeks, her expression hardening with sudden resolve. Her abrupt action startles Claude and his attendant. Now wearing a simple hood, Magnolia rubs her face and announces she's going to try something. The attendant protests that it is not allowed, but it's too late. Magnolia is already walking toward the line of commoners. The attendant cries out in despair, certain that Lord Claude will have her head for this transgression. She approaches the knight who is distributing food, puts on a charming expression, and sweetly asks for a plate. The flustered knight addresses her as Milady and agrees to give her a small portion. In the background, Claude and his attendant cover their faces in secondhand embarrassment, urging her to be careful with the hot food. Taking a bite, she finds the stew is just as plain as it looks. She identifies turnips, onions, mushrooms, beans, cabbage, and carrots. Finding a potato tuber, she notes its peculiar taste. She looks over the line of people receiving their meals. Her assessment is clear. The food isn't bad, but it certainly isn't good. The knight, sweating with anxiety, realizes this is a serious problem. Magnolia, however, is already deep in thought, formulating a plan. She needs to create work that requires little strength, has a low initial investment, can be done flexibly by women and children in various places, and uses cheap materials. She apologized for her sudden movement, explaining she just wanted to feel what it was like, but her brother, Brian, remained agitated. He clasped his hands to his face, exclaiming that rushing out like that is dangerous. She quietly promised to be careful. With her brother's concerns noted, they arrived at their destination, a quaint clothing shop. A friendly young woman at the counter turned and offered a warm welcome. Inside, Magnolia confirmed with the shopkeeper that they do indeed buy cloth. She then inquired about the price of a particular fabric, which the shopkeeper's older colleague identified as 2 medium copper coins for a small bundle. Magnolia immediately agreed to the purchase. The young shopkeeper then examined the fabric Magnolia had brought to sell, her eyes widening in admiration at the beautiful material. After a moment of evaluation, the shopkeeper offered 5 medium copper coins for 5 pieces. Magnolia eagerly accepted and presented the payment. Her transaction complete, she offered a cheerful thank you. Her demeanor then shifted, her gaze fixed intently on a small scrap of fabric as her maid, Lily, watched with a puzzled expression. She then presented the small scrap to the shopkeepers, asking what they do with pieces even smaller than that. The older woman explained they use them for patches or kindling. Seizing the opportunity, Magnolia asked if they would sell those unwanted scraps to her regularly. Her mind was already formulating a plan, work that women and children could do that required little strength, cheap materials, and minimal initial investment. The younger shopkeeper, though surprised, agreed, asking what she intended to use them for. With an agreement secured, Magnolia slammed her hands on the counter and announced to a startled Lily that there was another place she wanted to visit. Her next stop was a stark contrast to the small shop, a large, bustling workshop filled with women operating sewing machines. There, she sat atop a veritable mountain of fabric scraps she had acquired. Lily and the young shopkeeper looked on, bewildered by the sheer volume. Magnolia mused internally that her proposal, coming from a child, might not have been taken seriously, but with this much material, the scale of her ambition was undeniable. As she rode in the carriage through the countryside, she reflected on the state of the nation. Azinda was a country without any major industry, with preservation techniques far poorer than in modern times. Most of what was produced was consumed locally. Her thoughts turned to a specific problem she had discussed with her brother, Brian. She explained that during the harvest season, she'd heard that surplus crops were often thrown away because there was too much to sell, causing prices to plummet. He looked at her, puzzled, and asked what kind of trouble she was referring to. She clarified that it wasn't just an issue in the villages. Because so many people were unable to read or do basic calculations, she continued, they were often cheated on prices when selling their goods in bulk. The revelation left Brian momentarily stunned. She acknowledged that while education was important, there were other things to do first. Every effort, she concluded, bears fruit through steady work. Listening intently, Brian conceded that her point was true. A determined glint appeared in her eyes. This, she thought, was the fastest way. The focused effort reminded her of terms like job hunting from her past life in Japan. She decided to call her new project Otherworld Life Improvement Reform Activities. Having returned with Lily and her small companion, baskets in hand, she resolved to tackle her goals step by step without rushing. Her return was met by her older brother, Claude, whose expression was grave. He immediately asked if they were safe and if anyone's condition had changed, specifically mentioning rashes. When a confused Lily asked what happened, Claude explained that an unknown illness had broken out in the port town they visited. Magnolia immediately suggested sailor's disease, which Claude deemed probable. Though he didn't think it was contagious, he had already isolated the area and declared that Magnolia, her 3 companions, and Sebastian would be quarantined for 1 day as a precaution. He then took the lead, stating that for now, they would all go to the office. Looking up at him, Magnolia agreed, declaring that they could discuss the details there. This, she thought, was their very first mission. An illness known as scurvy, which can still occur even in modern times, presents with grim symptoms. Those afflicted grow weak, their teeth loosen and fall out, and old wounds reopen. Its severity varies, but in most cases, bleeding beneath the skin is a common sign, particularly for those who spend long periods at sea. Contemplating this, Magnolia identifies it as the sailor's disease. She explains that it is most likely a nutritional deficiency from long voyages, not an illness caused by bacteria or viruses damaging the body's tissues. Hearing this, Claude begins to understand, concluding that if it is not a contagious disease, then isolation is likely unnecessary. Magnolia is almost certain of her diagnosis, though she acknowledges there is still much she doesn't know about the illnesses of this world. He processes her words, asking for confirmation that this illness is different from the germ she had mentioned previously at the townhouse. He reasons that even with bacteria, incubation periods vary, so isolating the afflicted for just a few days would be of little use regardless. She looks at him directly, her expression serious. She explains that there are 3 well-known diseases from her former world: Earth, beriberi, pellagra, and the one they are currently facing, scurvy. Elsewhere, Magnolia explains the situation to Brian and Lily. Brian, seeking clarity, asks if the sailor's disease is what she means by scurvy. With a shocked Lily looking on, Magnolia confirms this, adding that it's what the disease is called in other countries. Meanwhile, in the estate's library, Claude asks Sebastian if a treatment for scurvy has ever been established. Sebastian grimly replies that it has not. Claude reflects on the history from Magnolia's world, with a disease claimed millions of lives during the age of exploration, and worries that the patients may be suffering from other illnesses as well. A sense of dread washes over Magnolia. She knew it would be like this. Since the cause is unknown here, all they can do is treat the symptoms. With sudden resolve, she orders a carriage to be prepared immediately. She decides she will go herself to check on the patients and offer assistance, though she worries how much she can truly help with only supplements. The sound of a door slamming echoes her determination. As she turns to leave, Sebastian steps into her path, his posture rigid and his expression severe. He looks down at the young girl and states with absolute finality that he cannot consent to her request. His face is tense, but his resolve is clear. Magnolia glares back, her own determination hardening in her eyes. His refusal is immediately supported by Claude, who insists she must remain in her chambers for her own safety. Brian anxiously questions her certainty, asking what if it's a similar infectious disease. Magnolia argues back, stating that it is most likely a nutritional deficiency and they must act fast. She declares that there are lives she might be able to save. When Sebastian calls her plan too dangerous, she makes a final, desperate offer. She will go to town alone, and everyone else can remain safely in isolation. She stood firm as Sebastian, the head butler, conceded that his words were correct from his professional standpoint. However, he insisted that her well-being must come first. He then reminded her of the fundamental duty of the house of Margrave Gilmore, to guide the land and its people. She countered that this was what any ordinary noble would say. With rising passion, she declared that the name Gilmore itself means those who protect. Recalling something she'd read in a history book, she found herself thinking of her brother, Claude, who held a similar conviction. Despite the opposition, she still could not agree to stand by and do nothing. Her thoughts turned to her brother's own words. He had argued against simply issuing orders from a safe distance, explaining that without a clear understanding of an urgent situation, such commands could fail or even worsen the danger. Swift, informed action was paramount. Back in the present, Sebastian's expression grew more strained. He reiterated that it was too dangerous for her, a member of the Lord's immediate family, especially with her father and Brian away at the main estate. He insisted that the proper course of action was to assess the situation first and then issue orders. She refused to back down, echoing her brother's resolve. When people's lives are at stake, she argued, there is no time for debate or hesitation. She even dismissed her own safety, pointing out that with her younger brother as the successor, her own place in the bloodline was secondary to the immediate crisis. Her voice rose with conviction as she pointed forward, declaring that the one who is able to act must be the one to go. An image of Claude appeared behind her, his fist raised in solidarity, vowing to protect them without fail. Sebastian could only stare, taken aback by her ferocity. Her passionate declaration left Sebastian stunned. He looked at the small girl before him, her eyes burning with an unshakable will, and came to a quiet realization. She was a true Gilmore. She was just like him. His mind drew a stark comparison. Lord Gerald had been 16 at the time of a past crisis, a young man on the cusp of adulthood. But Lady Magnolia, she was only 4 years old. The weight of the situation settled upon her, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She understood this wasn't something she could handle on her own. In a moment of desperate resolve, she reached out and gripped Sebastian's trouser leg. At that moment, Lily stepped forward, her voice clear and determined. She announced that she would accompany Lady Magnolia and asked if that would be acceptable. She declared her faith in her lady, who always takes responsibility for her words, and affirmed her duty as Magnolia's maid. Sebastian hesitated, realizing the situation had changed, as Brian and Dean watched from the doorway. She passionately declares that if she doesn't accompany her lady now, she will never fulfill her duty. Magnolia is stunned, only able to whisper Lily's name. Dean, however, steps forward, also volunteering to go as he is Lady Magnolia's servant too. He looks at Magnolia with surprising maturity, thanking her for the offer, but stating he cannot simply agree. He explains that the decision regarding his actions ultimately belongs to his parents, and he cannot take responsibility should anything happen to her. Her expression hardens with determination. Looking up at the older boy, she asks him directly what she must do to be allowed to come with him. He initially tells her not to force herself, that it's fine to stay. When she presses the issue, his demeanor shifts. He tells her that if she truly wishes to come, she must convince her own parents and secure their permission. With that condition set, he bows his head slightly, excuses himself, and promptly takes his leave. Meanwhile, in another room, Claude considers the unfolding situation. He reflects on the fact that, until this point, there have been no records of anyone on their lands contracting these symptoms. He deduces from Magnolia's actions that she must know of a similar disease from her previous world, and likely its treatment. He suspects she hesitates only because she cannot be certain how this world's version might differ. He acknowledges her mature act and vast knowledge, but remembers that the truth of her reincarnation is a secret known only to him and their father. He realizes she must be feeling incredibly frustrated by this limitation. He concludes that her youth makes it difficult for her to persuade others. She can give orders, but for negotiations, an adult is needed. With resolve, he declares, I'll go with her, but is immediately met with a firm, absolutely not. The objection comes from Sebastian, the head butler. He stands before Claude and Magnolia, stating that while he understands, the heir's safety must be guaranteed above all else. It is a situation, he insists, that cannot be helped. The head butler's reasoning is sound, a fact Claude concedes from afar. He acknowledges the logic, but remains troubled by the thought of Magnolia going alone. Magnolia herself stands before Sebastian, her expression pensive. To circumvent the impasse, he devises a new strategy. He asks for a letter of delegation, a document that would grant him the authority to act in the Lord's stead. He realizes that with such authority, it would be much easier to get people to cooperate. With a weary but determined expression, he confirms his understanding of the task ahead. He begins to write, asking if there is anything else needed while dictating an order to send a fast horse to the town's night corps, informing them that someone is being dispatched to deal with the disease. He then folds the completed missive. He calls over a young attendant, handing him the letter with an urgent command. Take this and ride ahead to the western garrison at once. The attendant confirms the order and rushes to depart. After dispatching the messenger, he turns back to his sister and asks if that is everything she needs. Magnolia looks up at him with a slight, knowing smile and replies that it is not, apologizing for the additional requests. She begins to list her requirements: cabbage and paprika seeds or seedlings, and a budget to plant them in the unused farmlands near the capital. She also asks for salt, chili peppers, caraway seeds, and bay leaves. Finally, she needs as many glass jars and ceramic containers with lids as can be gathered, with funds allocated to have more made if necessary. Claude agrees to each point. Her list of demands continues, growing more unusual. She adds that she will need permission to use the church kitchen and enter the premises, and requests that wages be included for hiring people from slums. The more, the better. Overwhelmed, Claude throws his hands up, demanding to know what on earth she is planning. Magnolia simply smiles, telling him he will see soon enough. With a confident grin, she announces that she's going to give their grandfather a presentation and solve the entire problem at once. Claude sighs, questioning why she's making such a big deal out of this. Resigned, he agrees to go along with it for now and prepare a draft budget estimate. Magnolia cheers in victory as the attendant, completely fired up, is seen rushing away in the background. Sometime later, Dean Palmore appears before Magnolia, accompanied by Countess Daphne and a maid. He announces that he has received his family's permission and will accompany her. Claude is aghast, pointing out that Dean is only 6 years old and declaring it unacceptable. But Dean stands firm, his expression shockingly serious, stating that if the worst happens, it would be an honor for him to serve as her shield. Having accepted the young boy's declaration, Claude presents Magnolia with an ornate pendant. He explains that it will serve as proof that she carries the same authority as their father, but warns her not to wield it lightly. Magnolia accepts with a serious nod, promising to be careful. Claude then turns to Brian, apologizing for sending him out again so soon, but entrusting him with Magnolia's protection. As a flustered Dean looks on, Magnolia, now fully equipped, cheerfully announces that they are on their way. Elsewhere, in a grand hall, two men in formal uniforms discuss an imminent arrival. One, with dark, slick-back hair, reports that a messenger from a lord's family has announced a party of 3. A young lady, her maid, and a servant will arrive by evening. His long-haired companion asks if they're doctors. The first man speculates it must be Lord Claude or Sir Sebastian, questioning if they could truly find a cure for the sailor's disease. The other man remains calm, stating they will hear what the visitors have to say first and decide their course of action after. A new storm is clearly about to rise. At the Palmore estate, just before the group's departure for a cruise, a debate unfolds over Dean Palmore's wish to help. Claude Allen Gilmore suggests the boy should stay behind, but Lily Morgan argues that Lady Magnolia's opinion is what matters. Countess Daphne directly questions Dean, asking what a child like him could possibly do. Despite the scrutiny, Dean's expression remains firm and unshaken. He passionately declares his desire to do anything to ease Lady Magnolia's heart. Even if he can't do much, he vows to properly carry out any task he is given, no matter how small. His conviction moves Lily to tears. She marvels that a child so young has already chosen the person he wishes to serve, noting that he would normally fall silent or cry. Claude watches the boy's resolute profile with a hint of approval. With a sigh, Claude relents. He tells Dean that if he is truly so determined, he must properly carry out his duty as his attendant. Dean's eyes widen, and after correcting Claude that his charge is Lady Magnolia, he responds with a resounding "Yes, sir." Following this exchange, Dean and another attendant are at a bustling market. As his companion carries a large basket overflowing with fruit, he wonders aloud if this will really help with seasickness. Meanwhile, Magnolia's small companion worries about the plan as Magnolia issues her orders. She instructs Lily to gather salt, herbs, jars, strong alcohol, and soap, while Dean is tasked with buying as many different kinds of fruit as he can, specifically oranges, apples, and kiwis. Inside a quiet, formal room, Magnolia sits patiently on a large sofa. The head butler, Sebastian, stands at a respectful distance, keeping a watchful eye on her. Elsewhere, two military men discuss their situation. The dark-haired man notes that after being shown to the guest room, he thought they would get down to business, but they have been made to wait. His companion agrees, suggesting they talk when the adults arrive, as they still have work to do before leaving. The small, ghost-like creature overhears their cautious words. From her seat, Magnolia allows herself a small, knowing smile. She understands perfectly well that they are on guard around her, a reaction she considers only natural. Her expression hardens with determination as she leans over a table, writing. She is dead serious about creating this cure. She thinks to herself that she doesn't care how they treat her, so long as she can succeed. Her notes detail the method for steam sterilization, key safety points, and the recipe itself. While she worked, the men tasked with observing her conferred. The long-haired officer reported that after requesting writing tools, Magnolia had focused quietly on her task, not complaining once during the wait. His superior acknowledged the report, instructing him to continue his observation and stating that as long as she cooperated, there was no issue. The captain then asked for his subordinate's opinion. The long-haired man remarked that she was surprisingly composed, even more so than his own 11-year-old son. Another officer, Ethan, sighed in agreement, calling her a well-mannered young lady, a sentiment the captain seemed to ponder. His subordinate, however, remained perplexed. He wondered aloud if she had truly not reacted to some form of creepy bullying, questioning if her demeanor was genuine. He mused that perhaps she really was there to treat someone. The captain, meanwhile, considered that while a simple greeting could be memorized, her responses felt too natural for her age, and he saw no reason for her to be faking it. He turned his gaze towards the child, his skepticism evident as he questioned if a subordinate could seriously believe in the capabilities of a little kid like that. In contrast, the long-haired man's expression held a hint of a confident smile, his own assessment seemingly unshaken. The captain's patience frayed. He narrowed his eyes and sharply told Ethan that he was talking too much. Following this, the long-haired subordinate offered a word of caution to his superior, whom he addressed as Mr. Machi-Eye. He advised that it was best not to let Magnolia into the office, especially Machi-Eye's. The captain replied dismissively that he had nothing to hide. He sighed, leaning casually as he elaborated. He reminded Machi-Eye to be cautious, as they were dealing with a marquis's daughter who also possessed the seal of an acting frontier count. He warned him not to act strangely. As Machi-Eye bristled at Ethan's suspicious nature, the long-haired man grinned, saying he understood before turning to leave. At that moment, a knock at the door announced that the young lady had returned and wished to speak with them. Upon entering, she presented them with a handwritten note. The childish script summarized her findings and included a simple plea. Please, don't turn this into a big deal. She then verbally relayed the information. One person from Azinda was at home with mild symptoms. 5 foreigners were also reportedly ill, but details were unconfirmed as they were being treated aboard their ship. The long-haired man listened intently as Lily stood behind Magnolia, looking flustered by the proceedings. She listens as the officer, Ethan, states that they do not yet know the full details of the situation. Her expression is firm and resolute, a stark contrast to the terrified maid cowering behind her. In response, she offers a serene smile and politely asks if someone might be available to guide her the following day. Her calm demeanor completely unnerves Ethan, leaving him flustered and speechless. He manages to agree. With a bright smile, Magnolia then announces her plan. She has already received permission from the dorm mother to use the dining hall and kitchen to prepare for the treatment. As she turns to depart, she expresses her anticipation for working with him. Left behind, Ethan silently fumes, questioning her surprisingly confident attitude. Later, inside the vast, empty dining hall, the maid, Lily, complains about Ethan's disrespectful behavior. Magnolia calmly tells her to ignore it, suggesting he was just shocked that a child appeared. Reinvigorated, Lily agrees they should give it one last push. Their work begins with Magnolia's precise instructions. First, a thorough hand-washing. She then directs Lily to chop cabbage and to only briefly boil the broccoli and cauliflower. When asked about the careful method, Magnolia explains that the nutrients needed to treat scurvy are not very heat-resistant. Next, Lily presents sliced apples prepared as instructed. Magnolia then tells her to mash other fruits and brush the resulting juice over the surface of the apple slices. She watches the slices intently, observing that the ones coated in juice take longer to turn brown. A specific term comes to her mind, vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid. The knowledge surfaces from a past life, a memory of her former self looking up the ingredients on a tea label out of curiosity and learning that it was used as an antioxidant. Returning to the present, Lily announces that the cutting is done. Magnolia explains that while yellow fruits are known for high vitamin C, the strange fruit Lily holds is a rainbow kiwi. She describes its colorful interior and other varieties, leaving Lily utterly amazed. She begins the process with focused determination, first kneading cabbage thoroughly with salt. Once the leaves soften, she mixes in chili peppers for their preservative effect before tightly packing the mixture into a jar that has been sterilized with boiling water. Holding up the sealed jar, she explains that it must be left in a cool place for a few days, releasing the gas periodically. When the liquid turns cloudy and bubbles appear, the cabbage pickle, sauerkraut, is complete. She emphasizes 2 key points for this fermented food: preventing unwanted bacteria from entering and keeping the beneficial lactic acid bacteria alive and active. Lily, watching intently, realizes this is why they had to boil all the tools beforehand. Magnolia confirms her understanding with a simple exactly, adding that the main goal is to stop other bacteria from multiplying. With the process understood, Magnolia declares that a large quantity will be needed. The afflicted will have to eat it every day for 1 or 2 weeks to see results. Unbeknownst to them, their activities have drawn the attention of a high-ranking officer. Captain Machiai stands outside, his arms crossed, and his expression unreadable as he observes from a distance. His gaze narrows as he overhears the conversation. He finds it unbelievable that scurvy could be cured not with medicine, but with ordinary food. To him, it seems like nothing more than a child's trick. Meanwhile, Lily holds up the jar, seeking final confirmation from Magnolia, who gives a simple okay. Having made his assessment, the captain decides to wait and see what the young lady is truly capable of. Later that night, Magnolia and Lily rest in a shared bed, the day's work concluded. But sleep does not come easily for her. A deep worry settles in her mind. There is no guarantee that this isn't a contagious disease, or what if it's a different illness entirely, one with merely similar symptoms? The uncertainty weighs on her. The thoughts churn, keeping her awake. Beside her, Lily sleeps peacefully, unaware of the burden Magnolia carries. Unable to rest, she gets up and finds a quiet place to think. Her mind drifts to a skill she learned to support herself in her past life, realizing it could be useful now. She contemplates what she should make: a coaster, a pot holder, or perhaps a cozy for teapot. She sat contemplating the craft of patchwork, a popular hobby in Europe that she had yet to see in this new world. It had been less than a month since she left the capital, a fact she found hard to believe. Her days were busy, but it was a familiar kind of busy, not unlike her previous life in Japan. As night fell over the coastal fortress, she tried to reassure herself that everything would be fine. Elsewhere, while Brian slept soundly, Ethan lay awake, his mind racing. He resolved that tomorrow he would visit the local shops to search for acerola or guava and verify if there were truly no known cures for scurvy. The next morning, inside a carriage, the tension between the two men was palpable. Captain Machiai sat with a strained expression, a bead of sweat on his temple, while Ethan beside him wore a wide, cheerful smile. Approaching Magnolia, Ethan laughed it off, telling her it was fine. He acknowledged that she was very busy and said she could ask someone else to handle things if she preferred. His offer left her momentarily stunned. He explained that he had worked through the previous night to catch up on his duties. Also, he would be free to act as her guide for the day. Internally, he lamented that it was because of her that he had extra work to do and silently pleaded for her not to add more to his plate. Captain Machiai, looking weary, interjected that work can be demanding and that they were short-staffed. Ethan, still smiling, countered that it was a superior's duty to train subordinates so that operations could run smoothly in their absence, implying Machiai was simply slacking. He then added that it would be better if work wasn't allowed to pile up to the point of requiring all-nighters, as he would be troubled if he were blamed for another's incompetence. He continued his passive-aggressive tirade, telling Machiai that they were in serious trouble and that the personnel situation in the Western Division had deteriorated because of his superior's blind eyes. Turning back to Magnolia with a pleasant expression, Ethan suggested it would be better for the captain to take a rest instead of guiding her, a thinly veiled dismissal. Before the situation could escalate further, Magnolia intervened with a polite smile. She acknowledged that their credibility was rather low and, as the unit commander, offered her own apologies. Her diplomatic move stunned Ethan, who began to protest, but Captain Machiai silenced him. Humbled, the captain placed a hand over his heart and sincerely apologized for any offensive remarks. He then formally offered to escort her, as they were scheduled for a detailed inspection anyway. Magnolia accepted. They arrived at a modest home. Captain Machiai stepped forward, announcing their presence from the Gilmore Knights Western Garrison and asking if anyone was home. A surprised Lily Morgan opened the door. As Machiai requested entry, it marked the first step in a plan to cure a mysterious illness in another world. In a sparse, stone-walled room, a young man named Paul lies sweating in bed, calling out for someone named Ethan. His call is answered by Ethan himself, who has just entered. He approaches the bedside, urging his friend not to force himself up and asking how he feels. Paul, looking relieved, confirms he is still short of breath, but that the dizziness has lessened. Ethan is glad to hear it. He sits by the bed, reassuring Paul that he'll be back on his feet in no time. With a confident smile, Ethan promises they will go drinking again once he's recovered. His expression then sobers slightly as he mentions another man, Rodri, from 2 houses down. His smile vanishes completely. Paul confirms that he saw it too. Ethan somberly reflects that Rodri was a good man who suffered from the same seasickness, remarking that it was strange, as Rodri was tougher than him and never got injured. He points to the distinctive bruises on Paul's arm, identical to the ones Rodri had, and voices his fear that Paul will suffer the same fate. As Paul weakly protests, a firm voice from the doorway cuts him off, declaring, "We won't let that happen." A group of visitors, their faces obscured by cloth masks, has arrived. The sudden appearance of the masked figures startles both Ethan and Paul. A tall man in a military uniform, Mr. Machiai, steps forward and, gesturing to the small girl at his side, formally introduces her, Magnolia Gilmore. The name shocks the two young men. Paul stammers in disbelief, recognizing the name of the border Margrave. Magnolia steps forward, apologizing for barging in and asking him to please stay as he is. She explains they came because she believes she knows a treatment that might help him. He looks at the small girl, questioning if there is truly a treatment for the seafarer's sickness. Peeking over the edge of the bed, Magnolia confirms that there is. She then politely asks for his permission to examine his body to check his symptoms. As she speaks, Mr. Machiai offers a patterned cloth mask to Ethan, instructing him to put it on. Ethan hesitates, arguing that if the illness is just seafarer's sickness, it shouldn't be contagious. Mr. Machiai clarifies that they are covering their mouths to avoid passing any other germs to the patient. Ethan stares at the unfamiliar cloth in his hand. Lily, looking at her own mask, has a moment of realization. She understands the precaution is to prevent them from infecting the patient. Mr. Machiai confirms her thought is correct. Lady Magnolia, her face partially obscured by a floral mask, explains to the ailing Paul that his body has become extremely weak, leaving him vulnerable to illnesses he would normally resist. The young man listens, a look of weary understanding on his face. She reassures him that they have disinfected their hands with strong alcohol, making it safer than touching him barehanded. Paul seems to internalize her words, moved that she would take such precautions for a commoner like him. With the situation assessed, Ethan steps forward, asking where he should begin the examination. Magnolia agrees, deciding they should start by inspecting Paul's mouth. The entire retinue, including Brian and Captain Machiai, watches the proceedings with focused attention. As Ethan prepares to look, Magnolia questions Paul about his symptoms, asking if he has experienced fatigue, dizziness, or minor bleeding from his gums when brushing his teeth. In response, Paul opens his mouth wide for the inspection. Peering into his mouth, she recognizes the signs. The symptoms match what she remembers of scurvy from her past life. Though she feels a tremor of fear at giving a diagnosis without being a doctor, she forces herself to remain composed, reminding herself to act like an adult. She then asks Paul if he consumed any vegetables or fruit during his time on the ship, to which he replies that he did not. Magnolia explains that his condition is very similar to an illness caused by a lack of a nutrient called vitamin C. The term is unfamiliar to Paul's mother and Captain Machiai, who listen with confused expressions. She reassures the anxious young man that since the illness is in its early stages, he should recover completely with a proper diet. She warns him that continuing to eat poorly will only cause his body to break down further. Hesitantly, Paul asks if he will truly get better. Magnolia promises to provide instructions for his meals. While she admits she cannot offer an absolute guarantee, she firmly states her belief that if malnutrition is the cause, proper food and rest will cure him. A wave of relief washes over Paul. He collapses back onto his pillow, whispering a thank you to Ethan. Tears of hope well in his eyes as the reality sets in. He's going to get better. His mother, equally overcome with emotion, clasps her hands together. As Lily presents her with a glass jar containing what appears to be a remedy, the woman thanks her profusely, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Her face streaked with tears of relief, the elderly woman agrees. As the group departs, Magnolia gives her final instructions. Ensure Paul eats plenty of citrus fruits, introduce other foods gradually, and contact the night order if any problems arise. Later, at the port, Captain Machiai provides more information. The ship Paul was on, the vessel Chamry, is based in a mid-sized nation called Ignis. It's a tropical country in the southeast of the Manhwa Empire, warm all year round. The small creature ponders the name, certain it has heard Ignis somewhere recently. Another voice remarks that the people from there seem cheerful and friendly, suggesting it might be a national trait. The topic of their previous discussion, the trade ship Chamry, sits imposing and magnificent in the harbor. Aboard the vessel, two stern-faced men stand guard. One, dressed in ornate robes, observes that everyone is asleep. The other, wearing a dark mask, dismisses the observation, stating that it's fine. The masked man's demeanor shifts, his voice taking on a menacing, sing-song quality as he declares that no visitors are allowed. Blocked by this decree, the small creature presents the acting Margrave's seal, hoping the symbol of authority will force their compliance. The robed guard grimaces under the pressure, but the masked one merely looks surprised. She is suddenly pulled back by the long-haired man. Hugo. Magnolia cries out in frustration as he urgently warns her that brandishing the seal could provoke an international incident. He steps forward with a disarming smile, changing his approach. He asks the guards to hear them out not as knights, but as individuals who have just visited the sick sailor, Paul. He explains they have information that might help treat the seafarer's sickness and only need to speak with someone for a moment. His appeal is cut short by a familiar, cheerful voice. The fruit vendor from a market recognizes Magnolia. As she recalls that he was from Ignis, Captain Machiai identifies the diplomatic young man as Hugo Dukas, the hero of the Civil War, and his companion as Ethan Berlioz. Machiai concludes that if they're investigating the sickness, Hugo is the one they need to talk to. He had assumed the girl was merely a relative's child, but the acting Margrave's seal, she possessed complicated matters. Before the negotiation could proceed, the nearby fruit vendor suddenly recognized Magnolia, asking if she was from the ship. She quickly turned the question around, inquiring about the crewman with the seafarer's sickness and explaining that the guards were blocking their way. The robed guard confirmed her account, stating that they had informed the person in charge, but their report was ignored. Hearing this, Magnolia offered a sincere apology for the trouble they were causing. In response to her apology, Captain Machiai stepped forward, offering to hear them out himself. He maintained, however, that he could not permit them to board the ship due to the risk of infection, even as Magnolia insisted the sickness itself was not contagious. The fruit vendor then interjected, pointing out the possibility that the patient might have developed a secondary illness alongside the first. Captain Machiai conceded the point and suggested they move the discussion to the guard station. As they prepared to leave, the vendor realized he had forgotten to introduce himself. With a hand placed respectfully on his chest, he revealed his true identity. He was Ernest Chamery, of the Ignis Kingdom's Chamery Trading Company. Now seated within the guard station, Ernest began to explain. In short, he stated, the seafarer's sickness occurs when the body suffers from a lack of a substance called vitamin C. He covered his face with his hand, filled with regret, as he admitted they had only ever thought of fruits and vegetables as merchandise, never considering that their own crew should be eating them. Magnolia added that it was possible the crewman had developed another illness, likely due to other nutrient deficiencies as well. She continued her counsel, explaining that a well-balanced diet would decrease the chances of developing the sickness. To aid absorption, she recommended eating apples or grapes with the skin on. Furthermore, she stressed that maintaining good hygiene would make them less likely to catch other illnesses. Acknowledging the difficulty of keeping fresh food aboard a ship, she then presented a large glass jar to a bewildered Ernest. She recommended he keep its contents stored on board, drawing an intrigued look from Hugo. She revealed the jar contained a preserved food made from cabbage called sauerkraut. To Ernest's utter astonishment, she explained that it could be kept for over a month if stored in a cool place. She explains that while sauerkraut isn't ideal for recovery, it should serve as an excellent preventative measure. As she begins to detail the production process, Hugo Dukas looks on, visibly flustered by her advanced knowledge. Before she can elaborate further, Ernest Chamery interrupts, stating that the information she has provided is more than enough. He suggests that such valuable knowledge is something she should put to good use for her own purposes. He observes her with a shrewd expression, deducing from her words and demeanor that she plans to use this knowledge for the governance of her territory. With a confident smile, he makes a business proposal. He won't ask for the recipe, but he would like to purchase the finished product from her on his next visit. He asks if she agrees to the deal, and Magnolia accepts. They shake hands to seal the arrangement, with Ernest expressing his hope that she begins production soon. Nearby, a pale Hugo Dukas reminds them to contact the Knights if any trouble arises. As the group departs, Hugo Dukas recoils from a foul odor, one he remembers from their arrival. Captain Machiai explains that a few days prior, someone attempted to break up a brawl by throwing a fruit called a durian. The captain then turns his intense gaze toward Ernest Chamery. He asks why Ernest was speaking with a broken accent earlier. Looking completely at ease, Ernest explains that if people discovered he could speak fluently, he would be drawn into too many hassles. He continues, stating that pretending not to understand the language is simply a more convenient way to keep himself out of trouble. The small creature silently acknowledges his craftiness. Waving goodbye, Ernest watches Magnolia's enthusiastic farewell and reflects that for someone so young, her behavior and mannerisms are far too polished and refined. His expression grows serious as he stands before his ship, concluding that she is definitely not some ordinary person. From a distance, Magnolia glances back, a bead of sweat on her cheek and a knowing, complex smile on her face. Her small, white companion shivers, its simple face contorted with confusion and anxiety. It seems to sense the weight of the unspoken agreement that just transpired, a silent, knowing chuckle echoing in the air. Meanwhile, aboard a ship, Hugo Dukas leans back with a satisfied smirk, musing to himself that things are becoming interesting. Magnolia, however, is far from amused. She squishes her cheeks in frustration, overwhelmed by the sudden realization that she has just plunged herself into massive trouble. Elsewhere, a woman with long, dark hair suddenly sneezes, struck by the urgent need to report this development to someone immediately. With a menacing glare, Lord Claude Allen Gilmore lectures his younger sister, Magnolia. He sternly reminds her to act her age, remember her status, and above all, not to annoy the Knights or go out alone. Looking up at him, small and contrite, she quietly apologizes, acknowledging his words. He continues his instructions from behind his desk, dipping a quill into an inkwell. He informs her that personnel costs vary depending on the hire and that he awaits a reply on the matter. He also requests an update on their affairs once things have settled down, referencing a trial balance sheet. Holding a document, she internally organizes her priorities, finding work for the struggling, particularly the elderly and children, and investigating the backers of the Chamery Chamber of Commerce. Turning back to her brother, she asks if he could deliver her reply to their older brother. The request causes him to snap his pen in surprise, but he quietly agrees. Elsewhere, Brian Chris Gilmore smiles serenely, relaying that the captains have arrived. The reason for his unease becomes clear as Yugo Dukas cheerfully pats a visibly tense Brian on the shoulder. Yugo remarks that Brian always dashes off so quickly that he never gets a chance to speak with him. Captain Machiai then intervenes, his expression severe. He tells Brian there is no need to be tense, suggesting that the travel must be tiring and that they simply wish to talk for a bit. Following their invitation, Brian stares down at a steaming cup of tea placed before him, his face beaded with sweat and his mind racing with suspicion. He cautiously takes a sip as Yugo begins his interrogation, asking why Brian hid the young lady's details when arranging their meeting. Pressed for what he knows, Brian frantically insists he knows nothing. Internally, he panics, recalling that he hid Magnolia's age because he feared they would be turned away for bringing a toddler, and now worries the tea contains a truth serum. His thoughts spiral as he stares into the cup. He laments his misfortune, becoming her guard by pure chance, nearly getting quarantined, and now being forced to act as a messenger. He sighs, thinking that things had only just started to calm down. He laments his perpetually awful timing. It has always been this way. During the night exam, he sprained his ankle and only passed as a substitute. He missed the induction ceremony because of fever. He feels he always messes up when it matters most, questioning why he is like this. His internal spiral is cut short as Yugo Dukas stares him down, his expression intense. Yugo gets straight to the point, demanding to know what the Margraves family is digging for in the Western Garrison. He clarifies the accusation as Brian looks on in confusion. Yugo asks if he is using a small child to make the knights let their guard down while he sniffs around for secrets. The boy vehemently denies it, insisting there was no such intention. He explains that Magnolia's arrival was a total coincidence. She thought her knowledge of scurvy might be useful and even talked down the adults who opposed her coming. He adds that she personally accompanied him despite the fear of contagion, and that Lord Claude and Sir Sebastian were worried as well. His defense crumbles into panic as the gravity of the situation hits him. If Lord Selves finds out about this, the consequences will be dire. Ethan shares his horror. Yugo, however, realizes Brian is hiding something. At the same time, Magnolia seems to decide that if they want an investigation, it will be faster to ask her directly. As Brian flounders, the scene shifts to Machiai questioning Magnolia. He asks if she is the child of Lord Gerald and Lady Wisteria, which she confirms. When he asks why she came to the Margraves' territory, he offers to find her a room elsewhere if she is worried, but she calmly states that won't be necessary. She answers his questions with startling frankness. With a placid expression, she explains that her father, Marquis Gilmore, seems to have hidden her existence for political reasons. She adds that the Marchioness didn't seem interested in a useless girl. Her admission leaves the knights reeling. Machiai confirms that she is a legitimate child, and she nods. Yugo is utterly dumbfounded, muttering that it's unbelievable. He realizes that, normally, she would be a candidate for the future queen, yet she wasn't even introduced. He surmises it must be due to an agreement between the families or a decision by her grandfather. Yugo slumps, overwhelmed by the revelation and letting out a deep sigh. Magnolia, however, smiles sweetly at him. She requests that, considering the very delicate and personal circumstances, they please ensure the story does not leak to the outside. While Magnolia handles the delicate political situation with poise, the focus returns to Brian, who is having a complete breakdown. He screams at the top of his lungs that he doesn't know anything and didn't hear a single thing, apologizing profusely. In the aftermath of the revelation, the air is thick with tension. Magnolia offers a strained, sweaty smile while the men tasked with protecting her, Yugo, Machiai, and Ethan, stand behind her with grim, stressed expressions. Machiai can only think to himself, good grief. This tense situation was the culmination of several days of intense activity within the estate, where Magnolia had been directing various projects with the help of her brothers and the household staff, including a mast made carefully preparing herbs. A few days later, her efforts bore fruit. A raven delivered a letter from Lord Claude, which he read aloud to his sister. He formally approved her plan and budget to prioritize hiring those who struggle to find work, such as the elderly and children. Magnolia accepted his approval with a determined look. His approval, however, did little to calm the nerves of her attendants. Ethan, sweating, insisted he had no intention of letting things escalate, but he was reminded that matters were already intensifying day by day. She, for her part, seemed to take the chaos in stride, reflecting that she never intended to cause a commotion. It just happened that way. An observer might note that such an outcome was to be expected from someone of the Gilmore family. Her family, however, was less composed. Brian cried out in shock upon finding her, while Claude recalled with exasperation how his sister, once she decides on a course of action, simply charges forward and drags everyone along, comparing it to riding horses down a cliff into an enemy camp. Ethan simply sighed, relieved. This chaotic energy followed her even to the dining table. As Magnolia stuffed her cheeks with food, Ethan informed her that visitors had arrived. Seeing her mouth full, he offered to greet them first, noting that her father was otherwise occupied. Those visitors were Paul and his mother. A maid directed them to the drawing room, informing them that the young lady would be with them shortly. Paul's mother exclaimed with joy that her son was feeling better, giving all the credit to Magnolia. The older woman was so overcome with gratitude that she bowed deeply before the young girl. She thanked Magnolia again for saving her son's life, explaining that he began to recover bit by bit from the day after he received her advice. Magnolia, looking slightly flustered, gently asked her to lift her head. She then turned her attention to Paul, gently touching his cheek. She asked if he was still hurting anywhere and requested that he show her his healthy face, her expression soft and caring. She looks on with a gentle smile, her eyes shimmering with relief as she expresses her sincere gladness. Her moment of relief is interrupted by Ernest Chamery, who approaches with a hand over his heart. He declares that everything is thanks to Lady Gilmore and extends his own gratitude for saving his comrades. Later, at what appears to be Ernest's establishment, he recalls telling someone he would have sauerkraut ready, thinking he would need to send a messenger. As Lily Morgan offers to help, Ernest invites Magnolia to sample the dish while he explains. Nearby, Hugo Ducas and the robe guard also try the sauerkraut, remarking on its delicious taste, pleasant acidity, and versatility as a garnish or snack. She beams, explaining that the food contains nutrients that people often lack. With a confident finger raised, she suggests that regularly purchasing it whenever they stop at a port would be a great way to support their health. Her pitch is a success. Lily Morgan, celebrating with a delighted Dean Palmore, requests to purchase all 3 large jars they have available, asking to include the payment for a previous portion as well. Magnolia presents the calculated amount. He takes the bill from her, his expression turning serious and unreadable as he examines the piece of paper. His silence is unnerving. He looks up from the paper and asks for a breakdown of the costs, startling Magnolia. She quickly explains, flustered, that since it wasn't a formal product, she simply combined the cost of materials with the price of the vegetables she had provided, treating it as a trial price. A wave of panic hits her as she wonders if she miscalculated the market rate. His serious expression breaks into a wide, knowing grin. He reveals a large pouch of coins, stating that even when including payment for the previous information she provided, the amount she asked for is hardly enough. He pushes the money forward, insisting that she use it for her future business ventures. With a determined look, Magnolia realizes he is making an investment, as he declares he will not accept any refunds. In a flashback, the man known as Ernest Chamery stands before a grand estate, his hand over his heart as he expresses sincere gratitude for the valuable stories that were shared with him. He speaks to Hugo Ducas, who explains that he must depart, having received a recall order from his home country's guild. Hugo, in turn, formally thanks Lord Ducas and Lord Berlioz for their handling of the recent situation, acknowledging their consideration of the circumstances. Hugo then addresses Magnolia directly, informing her that he has instructed his ill crew members to remain behind until they recover. He assures her that reports on their progress will be sent to her in the night order, and provides a way to contact him via his anchored ship, the Chamersey. As he boards his carriage, he reflects on the fortunate opportunity this has been. With a final farewell to Lady Gilmore and the others, he departs, leaving Creature_1 impressed by his incredibly solid and mature response despite his youth. The flashback concludes with Ernest himself turning to leave, bidding them all to take care, and expressing his hope that they will meet again someday. Later, during his journey, Hugo Ducas appears troubled. Mr. Machiai notices and asks if something is bothering him. Hugo voices his suspicion that Ernest is not merely a merchant. His refined manners and gestures suggest he is a nobleman of high status. Meanwhile, in a private chamber, Ernest relaxes until the robed attendant enters. The attendant questions Ernest's casual self-introduction to the Gilmores and his use of a first name, then bluntly asks if he intends to take Magnolia as his wife. The attendant presses on, revealing that Magnolia is a queen candidate for the great kingdom of the Skald. Ernest deflects, claiming to be a humble nobleman, but the attendant retorts that an 11-year age gap is not rare for such political maneuvers and that Ernest is far from ordinary. His attendant's words trigger a realization. With a sudden, sharp focus, Ernest understands. The girl is the descendant of the fairy princess of the fallen kingdom. He processes this new information as his attendant sighs, remarking that Magnolia was never the kind of lady who could stay hidden. Leaning back with a smile, Ernest agrees, noting that with her beauty, nature, and knowledge, it's no wonder the Marquis is hiding her. He can only hope war doesn't break out again. He rested his chin on his hand, a pensive look on his face. He mused that possessing an overabundance of talent could, at times, be a cruel fate. Meanwhile, Captain Machiai expressed his own frustrations, remarking to a visibly stressed Magnolia that diplomacy was a tedious affair. The captain then turned his attention to Ernest, suggesting he was also in a position to manage such matters. Ernest, however, simply denied it. In response to the captain's predicament, Magnolia clarified her own status with a sly grin. She was simply herself, she explained, not a key political player. The Gilmore family already had her brother Claude as the heir to the Margraviate and her other brother, Brian. Furthermore, the leading candidate for queen was Lady Gardenia. With all these pieces in place, she threw her arms wide and joyfully proclaimed her freedom, much to the captain's utter shock. As she reveled in her newfound liberty, Magnolia immediately pivoted to her next venture, enthusiastically calling for them to draft a business plan and start it up. Her declaration of a new reform activity was met with cheers from Dean and Lily. A bewildered Captain Machiai could only shout after them, demanding to know what she was planning now. From a distance, Hugo Ducas watched the energetic group with a smile, curious about their next move. Inside the Escald Royal Palace conference room, a tense meeting is underway. As an official drones on about the fiscal year's increased defense budget, the source of the tension becomes clear. Marquis Selves sits at the long table, his fingers tapping impatiently, his face a mask of grim annoyance. Suddenly, the Marquis chokes, spitting out his drink in a violent spray. The facade of composure shatters, replaced by a raw, desperate need. A single tear traces a path down his cheek as one thought consumes him. He must see his granddaughter. Driven by this overwhelming urge, he leaps to his feet and, with a powerful kick, splinters the grand doors of the conference room. "Let us conclude the meeting here," he bellows, his abrupt departure leaving chaos in his wake. As he storms down the palace corridor, his head butler, Sebastian, remains perfectly composed. He offers a calm apology for his master's rudeness before turning to a young attendant, Ethan, and assuring him that the door will be repaired immediately. True to his word, Sebastian later stands before the flawlessly restored doors. With a hand to his chest, he announces with quiet satisfaction that the repairs have been completed. Back in the conference room, the remaining nobles murmur amongst themselves. One comments that the Marquis seemed even more menacing than usual, while another expresses relief that the king had already departed. The chairman attempts to restore order, offering his apologies for the disruption. A young man with long, flowing hair, identified as Marquis Pervenche of the East Wolf, offers a different perspective. He cheekily admits that he speaks too freely, but then shrewdly questions why someone would be summoned to an emergency budget meeting where their attendance wasn't even required. He concludes with a smirk that something truly significant must be happening to provoke such a panicked exit. Far away, atop the high stone battlements of a castle, little Magnolia stands alone. As if hearing a call across the vast distance, a joyous realization dawns on her. Her grandpa is coming home right now. Her vigil is interrupted by Ethan, who warns her that it's dangerous to lean out so far. Beside her, her small, white companion agrees with the sentiment, but its expression shows it understands her eager anticipation. She watches a live broadcast of her grandfather, Marquis Selves, roaring her name, sensing his imminent return. Her attention, however, is on the present. She turns to Ethan Berlioz and asks if he intends to use the sauerkraut workshop she proposed. She explains her vision, to create a place of employment for those in the slums who struggle to find work, starting from the very fields themselves. He considers her plan, noting that while it's fine temporarily, it would likely fail if imitated. With a booming cheer from her small companion, Magnolia beams and agrees, revealing her full ambition. She wants to handle the entire process consistently, from the fields to manufacturing and sales, utilizing vacant farmland. She believes that if the business spreads, it could even help decrease the prevalence of diseases. She continues, giving a thumbs up to emphasize her point. To make the operation more efficient, she plans to cultivate different vegetables according to the season, paprika in the summer and cabbage throughout the spring, autumn, and winter. He listens, a look of realization dawning on his face. Ethan confesses that the fields were originally intended strictly for self-sufficiency, and his own plan was to build a business using a non-food product. He adds that Lord Claude had instructed him to inspect the West, which could serve as a trade gateway. Magnolia reacts with a quiet, surprised huh? The small creature silently wonders why Magnolia's brother would be involved, questioning if Ethan's presence was an instruction from Lord Selves. Ethan himself seems puzzled, prompting a sharp glance from Magnolia, who senses his confusion. He comes to a conclusion, believing she thinks he brought this proposal on behalf of her brother or grandfather. He reasons that since the West is a likely gateway for exports, her brother's involvement would indeed reduce potential trouble. She suppresses a giggle, realizing he's reached the exact conclusion she'd hoped for. She thinks to herself that it's perfectly normal for him to assume the proposal came from her brother or grandfather, especially since it involves sea travel and she knows he suffers from seasickness. She decides to let him believe it, figuring she's clueless about starting a business anyway and can let them take the credit. At that moment, a large black messenger bird swoops down, carrying a letter. Ethan is startled as the bird lands. He reads the message, which instructs him to return for now so the situation can be organized, and urgently asks Magnolia to tie it for him. He notes how well-prepared she is as she calmly takes the message, mentioning she was planning to return tomorrow anyway. After she secures the message to the bird's leg, Ethan gives the command, and the bird takes flight, soaring into the sky. With their business concluded, Ethan Berlioz kneels respectfully before the young girl, removing his hat. He addresses her formally as young lady. Magnolia looks back at him, her expression unreadable but attentive. She stares, wide-eyed and speechless, as Ethan Berlioz bows his head deeply before her. He looks up with a gentle smile, explaining that he is simply showing proper respect. The small, bear-like creature at his feet looks on in confusion. Later, from the window of her departing carriage, Magnolia addresses the assembled men, asking them to take care not to get injured or sick and to devote themselves to their work. She adds that she looks forward to their continued support. As she leaves, the men are overcome with emotion. One laments that it will get lonely, while another tearfully recalls the delicious cake she made for them, calling her their source of healing. A third man sighs, dreading the return to their usual, stifling ruggedness. Ethan sternly calls for their attention. From a distance, Marquis Selves and Hugo Dukas observe her departure. The Marquis notes she's gone, and Hugo remarks on how she resolved the situation. In the carriage, Magnolia fumes that she left without any punishment being given, having refused Ethan's apology. Hugo muses that she was a young lady like a storm, and the Marquis agrees, calling her small and precocious. Mulling over their words, she addresses her driver as Mr. Knight and asks if he was summoned again. From the driver's seat, the man replies that he was not. He clarifies that he just happened to be on guard duty for the mansion that day. He then adds that Lord Claude also seemed very apologetic about the recent incident, catching Magnolia's attention. Upon her arrival, Lord Claude is indeed waiting at the mansion's entrance. He stands with a faint, confident smile, flanked by Sebastian and several maids, including Rosa and Daisy. Her attention is suddenly ripped away from the welcoming party as a massive explosion erupts in the distance behind the estate. Her face fills with alarm. The blast wave throws everyone into chaos. The small creature is sent flying. Lord Claude is knocked off his feet, and the carriage driver cries out as he is struck by debris. Watching the pandemonium, Magnolia's expression hardens into one of grim determination. In a well-appointed room, she sits across from her grandfather, Marquis Selves, and her brother Claude. The Marquis confirms he understands the general flow of events she has described. He then poses a serious question, asking if she ever considered the danger posed by discrepancies between her memories and this reality. She admits that while she did, she simply felt that things wouldn't be all that different. She elaborates on her reasoning, explaining that this world has a great deal of overlap with her previous life. The language, writing system, days of the week, and even the concept of time are fundamentally the same. Despite these similarities, she acknowledges the discrepancies, concluding it's as if she is in a different country within an entirely different world. Her grandfather listens intently, stroking his chin in thought. He briefly considers if this place could be the Earth of her memories, but from a different era. He quickly dismisses the idea, reasoning that since no records of this world exist in hers, it is highly improbable. She flashes a bright, reassuring smile, telling them not to worry about her, and promising not to do anything truly dangerous. This declaration, however, only deepens the concern etched on the faces of her grandfather and Claude, who both stare at her with intense worry, thinking she lacks self-awareness. When the Marquis asks what is wrong, Claude simply says it is nothing. Changing the subject with gusto, she announces that it is time to discuss their new business venture. Claude takes the lead, explaining his desire to support those in trouble, specifically the people in the slums. He believes this will enrich the domain, noting that the slums residents are those who fell into poverty because of the war. He continues, dismissing simplistic advice like try harder as unhelpful. He asserts that there are fundamental reasons for their poverty and that any solution must be meaningful for both sides, not just idealistic. His goal is for them to regain their connection to society and the pride that comes from work to restore their human dignity. Leaning over a table laden with documents, Magnolia presents her idea. She had initially considered a business making small items from fabric scraps, but her newfound knowledge of scurvy has given her a new direction. She proposes they start a sauerkraut workshop. The group delves into the logistics. The vegetables needed are already produced in high volume locally, keeping costs low. The only significant expense is the glass jars. Claude suggests collecting unsold stock for various shops. When the Marquis questions the quality, Magnolia states she isn't particular as long as the jars are airtight. However, she dismisses the idea of simply weighing the product, as inconsistent container shapes could confuse customers about the volume. She decides against building a new workshop to avoid extra costs, instead proposing they borrow the church's kitchen. Believing Priest Sharon to be reasonable, she doesn't anticipate any issues. For storage and additional workspace, she plans to use the fortress to which the Selves family holds the rights. She notes they must inform the guild to facilitate recruitment from the slums, marveling at how quickly the plan is coming together. Her grandfather suddenly shifts the topic, mentioning a man from Ignis whose name sounds like Ernestos. He deduces it's a fake name and orders an immediate recall for his agent, Guy, instructing him to purchase goods from a specific vendor, Ernest Chamery. Claude gasps, realizing the connection. As the Marquis confirms the boy from Ignis is Ernest, Magnolia understands there is a hidden reason for this transaction. She resolves that it's fine, so long as it benefits their own plans. She slammed her hands down on the table, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. This was her otherworld reform activity, she declared with fiery determination. Her goals were clear: defeat scurvy and improve the domain's problems. Watching her, her grandfather, Marquis Selves, sighed with weary acceptance, acknowledging that this was indeed likely to happen. Her brother, Claude, simply remarked that things were about to get busy. Thanking them for their support, Magnolia proclaimed that their lives were going to be busier than ever before as she committed to her new venture. Her declaration hung in the air, But the moment of truth arrived under far more dire circumstances. She stood small and alone in a darkened room, confronted by several large, menacing figures whose faces were obscured by shadow. From the oppressive darkness, a pair of sharp, glowing eyes stared down at her as she introduced herself with forced composure. "My name is Magnolia Gilmore." Internally, she braced herself, recognizing the immediate crisis she faced. Across the continent, organizations known as guilds operate in key locations, and the nation of Azinda is no exception. These include the Commercial Guild for craftsmen and stores, the Magic Guild for wizards, and the Adventure Guild for adventurers and their collected goods. With a loud clang, the door to an office is thrown open by Victor, the boisterous guild master for both the adventurers and magic guilds. He cheerfully greets a man named Dominic, announcing that it's time for their meeting. He is met with a stern glare from Dominic, the Commercial Guild master, who chastises him for not knocking. Unfazed, Victor tells him not to be so rigid, explaining that since it was a direct invitation from a lord, he came personally to ensure Dominic wouldn't be late. As they walk together, Victor casually mentions that there is also a request for a refrigerating magic tool. Dominic, looking over the document, notes that it is quite an expensive order. Meanwhile, outside the grand doors of the meeting hall, a knight and a noble stand waiting. The knight wonders aloud if the meeting has something to do with the recently announced reduction in military spending. The noble sighs, expressing his unease about the significant conversation happening within and what stories might come of it. Elsewhere, Lord Claude is violently startled awake. The apprentice, Guy, looms over him with a menacing shout as the young Dean Palmore watches from the background. The scene shifts to the meeting hall, where an eclectic group has gathered. Several representatives from the Merchant Guild are present, along with Lord Ducas and Lord Berlioz. The presence of a priest named Sharon and even a common sailor indicates the unusual breadth of this summons. Claude's thoughts drift to one of the attendees, the man who woke him. He identifies him as Dan from the slums. His eyes widen with a sudden, sharp realization. He recalls that no one from the slums has caused any significant trouble recently, making the man's presence deeply suspicious. He realizes he may have overlooked something critical. Back in the hall, Marquis Self steps forward, commanding the attention of the room. He thanks everyone for responding to the summons and instructs them to be seated, as the agenda will begin immediately. The attendees, including Hugo Ducas and Ethan Berlioz, bow respectfully. He stands before them, holding his granddaughter Magnolia. The Marquis announces that he wishes to convey a request for public cooperation regarding the business products related to the recent scurvy outbreak. He assures them they will have a chance to voice opinions and ask questions. Following this, a man introduces himself as Hugo Ducas, captain of the Gilmore Knights Western Garrison Unit. He begins by addressing the assembly, reporting that 6 cases of scurvy were recently confirmed on a foreign merchant ship anchored in Cruz. One of the survivors, a native of the Azinda Margraviate named Paul, is present. The Marquis gestures to the young man, stating that the details will come directly from him. The young man introduces himself as Paul Moria, a resident of Cruz. He explains that he was aboard a multinational merchant ship from the country of Ignis when, a few days before docking at Azinda, a rash appeared on his skin. As he speaks, Lady Magnolia listens with focused intensity, while the room fills with the low chatter of the other attendees, including Guy and Hugo Ducas. The attendees murmur in disbelief. A representative from the Butchers Association voices his skepticism, questioning how scurvy, a disease with a supposedly unknown cause, could be cured so quickly through simple diet therapy. Hugo Ducas adds that they are all very surprised, noting that the young Lady Magnolia was directly involved in resolving the crisis, despite her age. As an elderly noble wonders aloud how she knew the treatment method, speculating that she merely relayed Lord Claude's teachings, Magnolia has a flash of insight. She remembers her past life in Japan and an internet article she once read that held the key. She turns to Hugo Ducas, a confident smile playing on her lips. She challenges him directly, asking if he doubts her. She offers to either read the materials she has brought verbatim or to simply explain their contents. Hugo is left stammering, completely caught off guard by her forwardness. Pointing a small finger at him, she presses her advantage, asking if he means to doubt the judgment of her uncle, the Marquis, who granted her permission to be there. Flustered, Hugo quickly retracts, insisting he would never dare to do such a thing. Having silenced the dissent, Magnolia addresses the room once more. She announces that she will distribute drawings showing the changes in the sailors' symptoms as they underwent treatment on the Ignis merchant ship, handing the documents to the attendees. She explains her logic. On long voyages, sailors subsist on dried meat, salted fish, bread, and barley porridge. From this, she inferred that they were critically lacking in fresh vegetables and fruits, the very items that could prevent and cure their affliction. A guild master, Victor, speaks up respectfully. He concedes her point, noting that it can take many days to reach port during long voyages and that spreading food to supplement nutrition is a valid concern. The other merchants murmur their agreement, acknowledging that freshness is vital, as nutrients decrease when food deteriorates. With a sudden, menacing shift in her demeanor, she turns her sharp gaze upon Guy. She asks if the food item in his business proposal is proven to be effective. She then questions the very need for a great noble family to seek more profit through trade, reminding him that business is not something to be undertaken on a whim. Guy visibly recoils from her intense scrutiny. She looked on with an unwavering gaze, questioning why there was such negativity towards distributing a product that could prevent a widespread illness. She reminded the assembly that, business aside, they all bore the responsibility of governing the domain. In response, Guy retorted, asking if it was wrong for nobles to profit from trade. He accused the attendees of being resistant only because they feared losing out themselves. Internally, Magnolia recalled her original plan to simply provide the funds and grant permission to those who wanted to participate. Turning to her maid, she instructed Lily to note that participation was not mandatory. A representative for the sailors, Paul Moria, then spoke up, acknowledging that it would be impossible to give the product away for free forever. He reasoned that since the product's purpose was preventative, it would be pointless if it couldn't be distributed cheaply to people in other countries as well. As he finished, Magnolia cleared her throat, preparing to reveal her true intentions. A look of surprise crossed Guy's face as he understood. This was a business opportunity for profit, a venture that would benefit the entire territory by getting the product to many people. He realized that those suffering from seafaring sickness were not the only ones affected. As the room filled with chatter, Magnolia addressed the assembly. She stated that while she wouldn't force anyone to participate, this venture was a means for them to secure their own livelihoods and jobs. It was a social contribution, she explained, a way to combat illnesses that previously had no clear treatment. To that end, she announced her plan to make requests to the Seedling, Glass Workshop, and Kiln Associations for manufacturing. She continued, detailing the plan to Claude. They would purchase items that would otherwise be considered waste from various artisans and associations, stylized meat, fresh fish, produce, and bread, adding a markup to the cost. For the containers, she added that as long as they met a basic standard, the bottles and jars could serve as practice for young apprentices. Her gaze sharpened as she laid out the conditions. The primary standard for these waste products was simply that they must be of edible freshness. She argued it was far more sensible to make use of them than to discard them at a loss. Moreover, she raised a point of hygiene. Leaving raw goods to rot could encourage the spread of disease. The Seedling Association's representative, Paul Moria, was visibly moved, expressing how grateful he was for her consideration and asking for advice on growing crops. Priest Sharon immediately pledged his full cooperation. Magnolia then added that they intended to process these raw goods and use them in meals for the new workshop staff. The priest affirmed his support, noting the church's proximity to the slums. He saw her plan as a way to save those struggling for food and suffering from illness. The fruit vendor, Ernest Chamery, eagerly offered to help by arranging the use of a kitchen and workspace from the church, much to Magnolia's delight. Sometime later, Captain Machiai stood before Marquis Selves and Hugo Ducas, presenting a report. He announced that based on experiments with volunteers from the merchant fleet, the results were greatly effective. Permission had been granted for the Chamery Company to purchase sauerkraut in bulk, and now, a formal petition had arrived requesting the right to export it to other countries. As he spoke, the Marquis's hand twitched around a similar document. He formally announces that the Margrave family and the Chamery Company will proceed with discussions regarding the business proposal, though he internally admits his dislike for the arrangement. As Lady Magnolia sits on his shoulder, the apprentice Dan observes the proceedings from across the room. Dan then interrupts with a cynical accusation, leaning back with his feet propped up. He suggests their true plan is to exploit the people from the slums with cheap labor to turn a massive profit. His words provoke an immediate, furious reaction from another noble, who slams his hands on the table and shouts Dan's name. The man scoffs at the idea of social contribution, declaring they don't have the luxury of giving out jobs based on sympathy. Dan Morellis Mirks. A tense silence falls. Dan continues his tirade, stating that while they cannot defy a noble's order, they won't be toyed with by a young lady's whim. He dismisses her words as pretty but empty and points out the hypocrisy in her offer not to force them to work, questioning if she even understands her own position. Magnolia remains impassive. He presses on, questioning her talk of sympathy. In response, Magnolia's expression transforms, her face contorting into a menacing glare that visibly startles both Dan and her brother Claude. She does not back down. Holding up a medical diagram, she furiously demands he look at it, declaring that this disease is the real issue. She argues that some people want to live even if it means being pitted, while others desperately want a way out. Dan reaches to snatch the paper from her. As he grabs the paper, his expression shifts to shock. Magnolia reminds him of those who suffered and died from this very illness in the slums, revealing that the solution to the once unknown disease is right before him. It is caused by a lack of nutrition. Her face contorts with righteous fury. Pointing an accusatory finger, she roars at him, questioning how he dares to ruin the livelihoods of people who want to be saved, all for the sake of his selfish rebellion and judgment. Her ferocity strikes him silent. He reels back, internally questioning how a normal child could speak with such force. He is forced to reconsider if she is truly just a simple, noble young lady. The intense standoff is suddenly shattered by a burst of laughter from Hugo Dukas. Dan fails to suppress his own chuckle, and soon the entire room, from Marquis Sells to Claude, erupts in unrestrained laughter, breaking the tension completely. The tense air shatters as Victor, the guild master, erupts in a booming laugh. He declares Magnolia's outburst to be refreshingly honest, concluding that the Gilmore family is, as expected, full of weirdos. While he roars with amusement, Magnolia stands frozen with a blank expression, and her grandfather, Marquis Sells, quietly closes his book with a stern, unreadable face. Across the room, Claude Gilmore watches with an annoyed expression, finding it hilarious that someone would be offended by the label. Dan, looking utterly defeated, is told to just give it up. Seizing the moment, Victor formally introduces himself to Magnolia as the guild master for both the Adventurers and Magic guilds. He confirms that his guild will handle the purchase of the waste products she requires, noting it will be easier if the process is centralized. However, Hugo Dukas speaks up, validating Dan's initial caution. He smirks, pointing out that just because they're dealing with nobles doesn't mean there won't be someone attempting to cheat on the cost price. Victor, still laughing, dismisses the concern with a wave of his hand, loudly calling Dan an idiot for even thinking someone would dare try that against the Margrave. She offers Victor a warm, genuine smile. With relief, she tells him he is truly reliable, almost like an adult who has become a child, and that she looks forward to working with him. His boisterous demeanor softens slightly at her praise. Her confident smile conceals a deep secret. Internally, Magnolia admits to herself that she was incredibly nervous the entire time. Nearby, Priest Sharon chuckles to Paul Moria, remarking that the young lady is quite the little rascal. For now, the case appears to be closed. Though the meeting is over and Claude looks utterly exhausted, Magnolia is privately ecstatic. She feels immense relief that they reached an agreement, reflecting on the unspoken pain and discrimination faced by the people of the slums. She believes her direct, confrontational approach was necessary to make them understand, and she's glad it all worked out so well. As she basks in her perceived success, a dark, intense presence looms behind her cheerful facade, the stark reality of the situation, embodied by Claude's simmering intensity. In truth, the outcome was not celebrated by all. While Magnolia felt triumphant, the powerful figures around her, her uncle Claude, her grandfather Marquis Sells, the hero Hugo Dukas, and even young Dean Palmore, were left fuming and agitated by the confrontation. Claude, however, smirks, remarking that it's a good thing everything ended safely. This earns a sharp rebuke from the Marquis, who whirls on Magnolia, demanding to know what she would have done if a fight had broken out. He shouts at her not to argue, insisting that type of person won't listen to polite speech. Claude calmly interjects, validating Magnolia's approach by explaining that for the distrustful people of the slums, gentle persuasion only breeds suspicion. Later, Magnolia discusses her strategy with Victor, the guild master. She defends her aggressive tactics, arguing that if she hadn't pushed them so hard, the merchants would never have engaged with them seriously. They wouldn't have stepped into their ring. Victor agrees, then turns his attention to Claude. He asks if it was indeed Magnolia who discovered the cause of scurvy and devised the business plan. Observing her closely, he remarks that she is the spitting image of Lady Azalea. He correctly deduces from her calling Claude uncle that she must be a child of the main family. His curiosity clearly piqued. The guild master smiles knowingly at the Marquis, commenting that he seems to understand the complex dynamics at play. He acknowledges that in reality, leaving all the fine details and startup arrangements to the Marquis and Claude places a significant burden on them both. Following this, Claude speaks to Magnolia directly. He explains the harsh truth that simply talking to a child would not have secured a deal. He then adds a crucial warning. Because she is so exceptionally talented, they must ensure the royal family does not find out about her true capabilities. With the tense negotiations concluded, the group moves on to logistics. Claude presents a preliminary list of needed items to Magnolia, pointing out the required sizes and quantities for glass jars and pots. Elsewhere, Victor and the Marquis review a more detailed document for the Commerce Guild, outlining purchase prices for cabbage and paprika seeds, notices for various guilds, and types of waste products to be acquired. The Marquis expresses concern over the high wages detailed in the plan, questioning if they can truly afford them. Claude explains he put everything in writing so the guild will be fully aware of the scope. He offers that his family can handle announcements and arrangements, but the Marquis suggests they might need the guild's help. Claude calmly reassures him, stating that while the initial costs are an out-of-pocket expense, they will be covered by profits once the business is running. She had originally planned this as a business venture to improve the lives and environment of those in the slums. Her brother, Claude, explains this to their grandfather, adding that they too have been wondering what could be done. He notes that if the slums improve, public order in the capital will get even better. The Marquis sighs, conceding that this is certainly true. With the discussion settled, Claude suggests they return to the manor. He lets out a weary breath, anticipating that things are about to get very busy. Suddenly, the head butler, Sebastian, rushes toward them, panting for breath as he calls out for Master Claude. Behind him, the guildmaster Victor, wearing a clown nose, shouts that fellow has returned and urges Claude to come to the office immediately. Sebastian finally reaches them, looking utterly relieved. Inside the office, the agent guy announces his return. Victor welcomes him back, remarking that he heard Guy went on quite a rampage. Guy notes that news travels fast. Claude, with Magnolia at his side, tells Guy he should have just come through the main door, but Guy retorts that being a secret agent is his job. When asked about the young lady, Guy explains he has sent her to her room to rest after a scare. He then hands a document to Claude, remarking with a smirk that he didn't expect to be called back before even half the expected time had passed. As Claude reads, the Marquis confirms his suspicions. The document reveals that the individual in question is known as the maternal grandson of the head of the Chamery Trading Company. Claude realizes this name is used for his merchant activities and is, in fact, his mother's maiden name. The information jogs his memory. He recalls the man's true identity, Ernestas Adolphus Ignis, the third prince of the Kingdom of Ignis, commonly known as the Unfortunate Prince. A chart of the royal family shows that Prince Ernest is the child of the king's third consort. Guy adds a twist, revealing that the prince's mother was a commoner. He explains that despite his immense talent, Prince Ernest is furthest from the line of succession, yet he is the most popular and capable of all the royals. The Marquis sighs that this is what happens with too many wives, but Victor loudly objects, arguing that the king himself should be happy with such a capable son. Claude's face contorts with irritation. Guy notes that not everyone shares the master's perspective and that women tend to flock to men of high status. When Victor asks what's wrong, Claude brushes it off. Guy then delivers another piece of news. Magnolia and the others were harassed in the capital. Continuing his report, Guy explains that because Prince Ernest overcame many hardships and grew up so talented, those who would be disadvantaged if he took the throne began targeting his life. He now travels between countries as a merchant to stay safe. As he finishes, a sharp knock sounds at the door. Claude and the Marquis turn, the former muttering how utterly absurd the situation has become. The knock at the door reveals Guy, who has returned much earlier than planned. Magnolia greets him with a wide, welcoming smile, glad to see he looks well. Beside her, Brian and Rosa appear surprised by his sudden arrival. In his hand, Guy holds the small spirit creature, now dressed in a tiny butler's vest, who spins around as Guy confirms his return. Her cheerful demeanor vanishes, replaced by utter shock. She hadn't thought he would even last a month on his mission, but she certainly never expected him to accomplish something so significant in just a single week. The source of her shock was Guy's report to her brothers. Marquis Selves noted that even on that very day, Guy had picked a fight with influential figures in the slums. Guy attempted to downplay the incident, claiming he only went there to cure a disease. Claude, however, was incensed, demanding to know if his slum-style explanation was all that truly happened. She recoils at the thought of the reputation Guy's actions might earn her. If he continues scaring guild masters and other important people, she imagines being saddled with terrible nicknames like Thug Young Lady, Tyrant Young Lady, or even Cackling Young Lady. The Marquis points out that she has already managed to involve Prince Ernest in her affairs. Claude declares the situation impossible and out of the question. Overwhelmed by their reactions, Magnolia resolves to simply stay quiet and do nothing more, while the little spirit stomps its feet in frustration. Guy, however, cheerfully announces that he has returned specifically so that she can mess around a bit. He then turns to the stunned Brian and Rosa, formally introducing himself as Lady Magnolia's guard and overseer. He claps a hand on Brian's shoulder, boasting that with him around, he's worth 100 men. He tells the speechless young lord that since they are now colleagues, he looks forward to working with him and asks that they take care of each other. Sweeping Magnolia into a one-armed hug, he roars for them to continue going wild to their heart's content. While Brian and Rosa let out a celebratory cheer, Magnolia is left utterly bewildered, quietly wondering what the duties of an overseer actually entail. A few days later, in the backyard of the Selves estate, Magnolia stands before her assembled team. Internally, she insists she has no plans to go wild. Outwardly, she begins her project, posing a question to the group. What is the most important thing for a field? Before they can answer, she declares with authority that above all else, it is the soil. Victor, the guildmaster, looks over the extensive list of tasks, making fields, farming, cooking, manufacturing, sales, and more, and lets out a weary sigh. Guy, ever practical, suggests they begin with the tasks that will take the most time. As the planning continues, Victor expresses his concern that if they don't start working on the fields immediately, they won't be ready for spring. Magnolia's small creature companion asks if the workers must be from the slums, but Magnolia confirms her desire to prioritize hiring those who are financially struggling. Her grandfather, Marquis Selves, looks on with a strained expression, mentally labeling his unstoppable daughter as thoroughly eccentric. Gathered around a document, Magnolia outlines her strategy for the glass jars needed for their product. She suggests starting with small-scale production to establish clear standards before moving to bulk manufacturing. She also mentions considering various regions for workshops to avoid the burden of transporting everything to the capital. Guy, taking the details, confirms he will pass the information along. Out in the fields, Magnolia walks among the workers, laying out her core principles. She explains that to ensure their sauerkraut reaches everyone who wants it, they must produce a sufficient quantity and, crucially, it must be affordable. Her expression intensifies, a look of pure, unadulterated greed flashing across her face. She declares that to achieve high-volume sales at low margins, they must thoroughly eliminate all waste. This isn't just about profit. She wants to generate a decent income because this industry is meant to create a foundation for many people's lives. As Magnolia announces that they are starting from scratch by preparing the fields, a young man with freckles and curly hair, Paul Moria, stops in his tracks. He stares in utter shock, mouthing his own name in disbelief. He rushes toward her, calling out, "Young lady." He asks what she's doing there and questions her about her work on the ship, his confusion evident. Magnolia seems surprised by his sudden appearance. Without warning, Paul bows deeply before her, his voice trembling with urgency. He explains that he understands her business is meant to help those who are struggling and desperately begs to be allowed to participate. Victor, observing the scene, clarifies the situation for Paul. He explains that Magnolia had mentioned prioritizing hiring people from the slums, which is why it seemed hard for Paul to ask to join. Paul realizes this was the reason for her earlier questions. Victor continues, adding that since they plan to sell to people from other countries in the town of Cruz, having someone like Paul with merchant ship experience would be a huge help. At this, Paul's face breaks into a wide, ecstatic grin. With her team now expanded, Magnolia beams, her arms spread wide in a gesture of welcome. Surrounded by the hopeful faces of Paul, Victor, Guy, Claude, and the other workers, she officially christens their new venture. "Welcome to the Everything Workshop." She stands with the diverse group she has assembled. Guy bursts into laughter, exclaiming what a strange name she has chosen. In response, Victor, the guildmaster, booms with enthusiasm, explaining that it's called the Everything Workshop precisely because they will tackle anything necessary. It is a workshop without boundaries, also that everyone can be happy. As her grandfather, Marquis Selves, applauds loudly, her brother Claude remains unimpressed, finding it all a bit much. The small, white creature beside him puffs out his cheeks. With this proclamation, the Everything Workshop has officially launched, its first task being the reclamation of abandoned farmland. Despite the grand declaration, Magnolia can't help but wonder to herself if there wasn't a better name. The newly formed Anything Workshop springs into action. Victor, the guildmaster, bellows orders, directing the carpenter and farmer groups to their respective positions as the project begins. Their destination is a plot of fallow farmland on the eastern side of the domain, which is set to be reclaimed. A carriage loaded with supplies and luggage stands ready for the journey. Inside the carriage, Guy remarks to Ethan that he thinks it's a good location, being relatively close to both the slums and the Gilmore mansion. From behind a curtain, the small, white creature peeks out curiously. As the work begins, Guy demonstrates astonishing strength, effortlessly lifting a massive wooden beam that would normally require several men. Watching from the carriage window, Dean Palmore stares in disbelief, muttering to himself that Guy is a monster. Dean catches up to Guy, asking why they were made to run. Guy explains that the initial work is very physical, and since many people from the slums aren't in peak condition, he recruited knights on their day off to help as part of their training. As they arrive, an elderly man from the local village steps forward, welcoming them. Lady Magnolia, accompanied by Rosa, thanks the village elder for his time and asks if he can guide them to inspect the farmland. He readily agrees. Rosa announces that she and the other maids will begin preparing a meal for the workers as the crew begins unloading supplies in the background. While inspecting the land, Magnolia explains her plan to the elder. She suspects the fallow land is nutrient deficient and intends to create fertilizer from leaf mold, vegetable peels, and eventually, waste from her planned sauerkraut workshop. She offers the finished compost for the villagers to use as well, a proposal the elder gratefully accepts as a wonderful thing. She then adds that she'd also like to build a small hut. Guy overhears and suggests that if they're going to build something, it should be a communal space for the settlement, noting it would be better to have a slightly larger field. He thanks her for her thoughtful planning. As the work begins, Lady Magnolia explains her next idea to the village elder. Holding up a clean bone, she details how bones, eggshells, and seashells can be washed, dried, burned, and then ground into a powder. This, she explains, will create an excellent fertilizer. The elder looks on, surprised, questioning if even bones can be used in such a way. The elder is taken aback by her knowledge, remarking that a young lady like her shouldn't even be concerned with farm work, yet she is so well informed. He adds that shell powder is also useful for cleaning. Magnolia listens, her expression earnest. He then turns to the other villagers, sharing what he's learned. They react with astonishment, having never considered such methods. In the background, the construction of the hut continues apace. Inspired by the collaborative atmosphere, one of the men calls out to the others, asking for help with his section of the work. Another man quickly agrees, and the sense of shared purpose strengthens among the group. As they till the land, a worker unearths a large stone from the soil. Watching from a short distance, Claude Allen Gilmore instructs the man to gather any such troublesome stones they find. He watches with a faint, satisfied smile as the villagers diligently clear the field, their efforts now more organized and efficient. Suddenly, Rose's voice cuts through the air. Banging a pan for attention, she loudly announces a break for lunch. The tantalizing smell of food wafts over the workers, who erupt in hungry cheer and rush forward after she reminds them to wash their hands. Lily Morgan informs the crowd that there may not be enough bowls for everyone and suggests they use their own if possible. Beside her, Magnolia cheerfully invites everyone to eat. The villagers gather around, their faces filled with gratitude. Guy offers a steaming bowl of food to a woman, who looks up at him with surprise. In the background, a strange scene unfolds within a large wooden tub, where a maid is partially submerged. The maid, submerged to her shoulders in a bubbling, frothy liquid inside the tub, looks utterly bewildered. What is this?" she asks, her voice filled with confusion. In the bustling kitchen, Lady Magnolia takes charge of preparing the staff's meal. She instructs her maids that they must begin now, as the process is time-consuming. She gestures towards a large pot where animal bones are being boiled down and points out fish bones being grilled separately, explaining that these are for making stock. She then directs Lily to watch over another pot, telling her to skim any scum that appears and to later add the rendered bones. Magnolia herself begins crafting an instant grilled meat sauce, listing the ingredients: grated garlic, ginger, and onion, followed by honey, chili pepper, the juice of a misiu fruit, and finally, grated apple and pear. The secret to her Japanese-style flavors is revealed. The dark liquid squeeze from the misiu fruit serves as a soy sauce substitute, while the fruit's crushed pulp remarkably resembles miso paste. With these substitutes, she can create dishes reminiscent of Japanese cuisine. A full meal is presented, featuring grilled offal, fish broth udon, and a hearty pot au feu. Cradling her small spirit companion, Magnolia thinks that the only thing missing is rice. The meal is served to the villagers and workers. One large, muscular man stares hesitantly at a skewer of grilled offal. He recognizes it as innards, but has never eaten them prepared this way, and he nervously contemplates his first bite as others watch on. He takes a bite, and his expression explodes with delight. He roars that it's delicious, feeling the rich flavor seep into his weary body. His enthusiastic reaction prompts the other workers, including a surprised Claude, to dig in. The man immediately demands a second helping. Claude also tries the grilled offal, his eyes widening in surprise. He remarks that the different parts have varied tastes and textures, making the experience quite interesting. The village elder, also partaking, notes that the fat is sweeter than he anticipated. He concedes that while there's a slight gaminess, it's very tasty. He recalls Magnolia's plan to use the bones for fertilizer and feed, musing that her methods truly leave no part to waste. This thought prompts the elder to ask Magnolia about the usual disposal methods for leftovers. He explains that while practices vary, most households either burn the scraps or bury them in a pit. Magnolia confirms his assessment. She then advises that, although it requires a bit more effort, she recommends burning and then crushing the bones. This way, she explains, they can be repurposed, making them not only part of a delicious meal, but also useful afterward. She watches as the villagers, filled with camaraderie, celebrate the successful meal. Laughter rings out as they share food and drink, their spirits high after a hard day's work. Taking a bite herself, a realization dawns on her. This feeling of unity must be what it means to eat from the same pot. The entire village, from the elderly to the very young, partakes in the feast with joyous abandon. Sometime later, back at the Sells estate, Dean Palmore celebrates, exclaiming that their project was a great success. Magnolia responds more modestly, stating she is simply glad that it ended well and that they fostered good relations with the local people. He continues with a smug grin, musing that completing the tilling of the fields and the construction of a fertilizer shed in a single day is nothing short of monstrous. In the background, Rosa watches over them. Just then, Daisy approaches them with news. She asks if they've heard about the soldiers who couldn't attend the meal. According to her, they were so regretful after hearing about the phantom cuisine that a fierce rivalry has broken out among them to be included in the next work detail. This gives Magnolia an idea to devise another menu. Her thoughts are interrupted by Claude, who has just arrived and spotted a plate of crispy fried fish bones, exclaiming that he wants to eat them. Magnolia makes a mental note that she also needs to create informational leaflets for her products. He then asks what she is doing, explaining that with the weather turning colder, he thought it was about time they paid someone a visit. He trails off, momentarily confused, as if forgetting who he intended to say, prompting a questioning look from the small spirit. Claude clarifies his intention. They're to visit her grandmother and great-grandmother. The view opens to reveal the ornate gates of a large cemetery, its stone path winding up a hill lined with gravestones. Standing within the cemetery, Magnolia learns of its history. The ducal family of Azinda Park has deep ties to the Holy Royal Family of Montiliana, hence the location of their cemetery near the Holy Kingdom. When her great-grandmother Azalea moved to Azinda, she was offered a place in the main Gilmore family tomb, but declined. With a solemn expression, Magnolia clasps her hands. It is said that her great-grandmother chose to put the feelings of the domain's people first, selecting a final resting place where she could be with them. She watched Claude, her expression somber. As Marquis, Cell spoke to him. The Marquis suggested they also visit the graves of Claude's birth parents, telling him not to worry about it. Claude, however, looked away, murmuring a quiet protest. He gave Claude a reassuring smile, gently patting his head. The Marquis insisted they go, explaining that since he now considered Claude his son, it was only right to report this to his parents. Claude's gaze remained fixed on the ground, his conflict unspoken. As their group walked through the cemetery, the scene mirrored a moment from 102 years prior, when Essel's family took in the sole survivor of another baronial house. The Marquis continued, telling Claude not to feel indebted, as he was the one who was always being cared for by Claude. The young man's attention drifted to a specific tombstone. His form suddenly seemed to fracture in Magnolia's sight. As the world distorted around him, Claude turned to her and asked what was wrong. The strange sensation was unsettlingly familiar. The feeling plunged her into an internal vision, Claude's back dissolving into nothingness as a single white feather drifted down. Questions raced through her mind. Who was Claude? Where did this bizarre feeling come from? Yet, through the confusion, a single truth emerged. She knew this person. That realization brought tears streaming down her face. Daisy rushed to her side, asking what was wrong. Magnolia could only clutch her dress, overwhelmed by an uncontrollable flood of emotion. At that moment, as the season began its turn toward winter, her past memories surged forth with her tears.